Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The winter of 2019 was brutal, even by Chicago standards. The kind of cold that made veteran cops question their career choices and had the brass worried about officers freezing to death in their patrol cars. I'd been working the South Side beat for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything the city had to offer. Violence, desperation, the worst of human nature laid bare under the harsh streetlights. But that February night, during one of the coldest snaps in decades, I learned there were things hiding in Chicago's shadows that defied explanation. My name is Officer Clarence Mitchell, badge number 7521. I worked the night shift out of the 7th District, patrolling some of the roughest neighborhoods in America. The South Side after midnight was a different world, especially in winter. The gangbangers stayed inside. The drug dealers moved their operations indoors, and the streets became a frozen wasteland where only the desperate or the crazy ventured out. That night, February 15th, the temperature had dropped to negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit. With the wind chill, it felt like negative 40, the kind of cold that killed. The patrol car's heater was working overtime, blasting hot air that still couldn't quite keep the frost from forming on the inside edges of the windows. I had to scrape the windshield every hour just to maintain visibility. It was 2:17 a.m. when everything started to go wrong. I'd been cruising down Cottage Grove Avenue, past the shuttered businesses and abandoned lots that dotted the landscape like missing teeth in a broken smile. The radio had been quiet all night. Too quiet, really. Usually, even on the coldest nights, we'd get something. A domestic dispute when the heat went out and tempers flared. A wellness check on some poor soul who might be freezing to death. Maybe a drunk driver sliding into a snowbank. But that night, nothing. Just the steady hiss of static that served as a constant companion during the long, lonely hours. The first sign something was off came when I tried to call in for a status check. Standard procedure. Every hour, on the hour, we were supposed to confirm our location and status. But when I grabbed the handset and pressed the transmit button, the static changed. It got louder, more aggressive somehow, like it was pushing back against my attempt to communicate. Dispatch, this is 721, status check, over. Nothing. Just that wall of white noise. I tried again, adjusting the squelch, checking the channel. We'd had new radios installed just 6 months ago, state-of-the-art digital systems that were supposed to be immune to interference. But the static persisted, and underneath it I started to hear something else. Voices, multiple voices, all talking at once, but too faint to make out individual words. It sounded like being in a crowded restaurant, that constant murmur of conversation, except it was coming through my radio at 2 in the morning, when I should have been the only unit on this frequency in this sector. I pulled over near 63rd Street, put the car in park, and really focused on the radio. The voices were definitely there, buried under layers of static. Sometimes a word would break through, clear as day, then disappear back into the noise. Help, cold, can't, please. Different voices, men and women, some sounding young, others old, all of them desperate. Then, cutting through all of it, I heard my name. Clarence. It was crystal clear, like someone sitting in the passenger seat had spoken. A woman's voice, familiar but wrong somehow. I knew that voice, but I couldn't place it. Who is this? Identify yourself. This is a restricted frequency. The static surged, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard laughter. Not pleasant laughter, but the kind that comes from someone who's seen too much and broken under the weight of it. "Clarence, there's been an incident. 5847 South Prairie Avenue. Respond immediately. Code 3, no backup." The voice clicked into place in my memory. Mildred Thompson, one of our longtime dispatchers. But that was impossible. Mildred had retired 3 years ago. I'd been at her retirement party, watched her cry as she gave her farewell speech about 35 years of service. She and her husband Ron had moved to Fort Myers, Florida. She'd sent the district a postcard just last Christmas showing them on a beach, tanned and smiling. "Dispatch, please identify yourself. Who am I speaking with?" The response was more static but shaped somehow, formed into words I could almost understand. The voices underneath grew more insistent, more desperate. I could pick out individual words now. Basement. Trapped. Dying. So cold. Every instinct I had told me something was wrong. This wasn't dispatch. This couldn't be Mildred. But 5847 South Prairie Avenue was only 6 blocks away, in the heart of one of the neighborhoods hit hardest by the recession. Blocks of abandoned houses, boarded, windows, overgrown yards. The kind of place where bad things happened and nobody called the cops because nobody was around to see them. I should have called for backup on my cell phone. Should have driven back to the station. Should have done anything except what I did, which was put the car in drive and head toward that address. As I drove, the radio cycled through different states of chaos. Sometimes it was pure static, so loud I had to turn the volume down. Other times, it was those voices, getting clearer, more distinct. I heard a child crying, a man praying in Spanish, a woman reciting what sounded like badge numbers over and over, like a mantra. I tried my cell phone, but the screen was going crazy. The temperature reading, which should have shown the negative 22 degrees outside, was fluctuating wildly. -50, -100, -200. Numbers that didn't make sense, that couldn't exist in nature. Then the screen went black and wouldn't turn back on. The street seemed different as I drove. Familiar landmarks looked wrong in the dim streetlight. Buildings I'd passed 1,000 times seemed to lean at impossible angles. The shadows between structures were too dark, too deep, like holes cut in the fabric of the world. And the cold, even inside the heated patrol car, I could feel it pressing in, a living thing trying to find a way inside. 5847. South Prairie Avenue was exactly what I'd expected. A 2-story house that had probably been beautiful once, back in the 1920s when this neighborhood was thriving. Now it was a skeleton. Windows broken and boarded, front door hanging off its hinges, roof partially collapsed from years of neglect and harsh winters. The kind of place kids dared each other to enter on Halloween. The kind of place where homeless people sometimes took shelter and froze to death when the temperature dropped. But there were footprints in the snow leading to the front door. Fresh ones, made within the last hour based on how little snow had filled them in. Large boots, size 11 or 12, with a distinctive tread pattern I recognized as a police issue. I parked the cruiser at the curb, leaving the engine running and the lights on. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the front of the house. But somehow the shadows seemed to eat the light, remaining stubbornly dark. "Chicago PD," I called out as I approached the door, my breath forming thick clouds in the freezing air. The cold hit me like a physical assault the moment I left the vehicle. It burned my lungs, made my eyes water, sent shooting pains through my teeth. Anyone in there? No response except the wind howling through the broken windows. The footprints led through the doorway and up the stairs visible just inside. But there was something wrong with them. The pattern was off. like whoever made them had been dragging something, or maybe dragging themselves. And there were other marks in the snow, symbols or letters maybe, but obscured by the recent snowfall. I clicked on my flashlight and followed the tracks inside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing an interior that had been destroyed by time and vandals. Graffiti covered every surface, most of it old and faded. Gang tags from crews that hadn't existed for a decade. Pentagrams and occult symbols drawn by kids trying to be edgy. And underneath it all, barely visible, those same strange marks I'd seen in the snow. The floorboards creaked ominously under my weight. Some were missing entirely, revealing the dark basement below. The smell hit me as I moved deeper into the house. Rot, mold, and something else. Something chemical and wrong, like formaldehyde mixed with burned electronics. The footprints continued up the stairs. Each step groaned as I climbed, and I kept my hand on my weapon, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against whatever was waiting for me. The cold seemed even more intense inside the house, which shouldn't have been possible. Ice had formed on the walls, creating crystalline patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like writing. At the top of the stairs, a hallway stretched out before me. 4 doors, all closed except for the one at the far end. The footprints led directly to it. As I approached, my radio suddenly burst to life. "Clarence, don't open that door." It was Mildred's voice again, but different now, frightened, urgent. "Who is this? How do you know where I am? Please, Clarence, just leave. Leave now. You don't have much time." But I couldn't leave. My training, my duty, my stubborn curiosity, they all pushed me forward. Someone might be in danger, someone might need help. That's what I told myself as I reached for the doorknob. The metal was so cold it burned through my glove. I could feel the ice forming on it, spreading from the point of contact like an infection. I turned it slowly, pushed the door open, and shined my flashlight inside. The room was wrong. Not just empty or abandoned, but wrong in a way that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They overlapped each other, creating layers upon layers of images. As I stepped closer, I realized they were all pictures of police officers. Different uniforms from different eras, some in black and white, some in color, some that looked like they'd been taken with modern digital cameras. I recognized some of the faces. Officers from my district, from other districts, some who'd retired, some who'd died on duty. They were all candid shots, taken without the subject's knowledge. Officers getting into patrol cars, walking their beats, entering their homes. The kind of photos a stalker would take. And there, in the center of the far wall, was a picture of me. It had been taken recently, within the last week, based on the winter jacket I was wearing. I was getting out of my patrol car in the district parking lot, probably at the start of my shift. Below it, written in what looked like charcoal or ash, was today's date and a time, 2:47 a.m. I checked my watch. 2:43 a.m. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, drawing my weapon, but there was no one there. I tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. It wasn't just locked, it was frozen solid. Ice was spreading across the wood from the handle, creating those same crystalline patterns I'd seen in the hallway. But now, I could see they were definitely words, written in a language I didn't recognize. My radio crackled again, but this time it was my own voice coming through. "Dispatch, this is Officer Mitchell. I'm at 5847 South Prairie. Everything's clear here, false alarm, returning to patrol." But I hadn't said that. I hadn't touched my radio. "Copy that, 721, return to patrol." That was dispatch, the real dispatch, but there was something underneath the dispatcher's voice. That same quality I'd heard in Mildred's voice, like it was being filtered through something dead. I kicked at the door, threw my shoulder against it, but it wouldn't move. The cold was getting worse, impossibly worse. My breath was coming out in huge clouds that hung in the air instead of dissipating. Ice was forming on my eyelashes, my eyebrows inside my nose. The flashlight was dimming, the batteries dying in the extreme cold. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Slow, measured steps. They stopped right outside the door. "Who's out there?" I shouted. "This is Officer Mitchell, Chicago PD. Open this door immediately." The footsteps started again, but now they were walking away. I could hear them going down the stairs, each step echoing in the empty house. Then the distant sound of the front door closing. I was alone. That's when the photographs on the wall started to move. It was subtle at first, a face turning slightly, an eye closing, a hand raising. In the dying beam of my flashlight, the images seemed to pulse and writhe like living things. And I realized that not all the photos were of officers who were still alive. Some were memorial photos, the kind they put up at the station when an officer dies. And those officers, the dead ones, they were all looking at me now. My radio exploded with sound, screaming. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all screaming in absolute terror. The sound was so loud it made my ears ring, made my head feel like it might split open. I fumbled for the volume control, but the knob wouldn't turn. The screaming continued, getting louder, more desperate, until I could make out individual voices within the chaos. I heard partners I'd worked with, dispatchers I knew, officers from other districts, all of them screaming, begging, pleading for help that wouldn't come. And underneath it all, I heard names. They were saying names over and over. Eugene Morrison, Michael Torrance, Sarah Chen, James Rodriguez. Names I didn't recognize, but somehow knew were important. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the screaming stopped. The door clicked open. I didn't hesitate, I ran, down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, barely avoiding the holes in the floor. Out the front door into the blessed, natural cold of the Chicago night. Across the snow-covered yard to my patrol car, which was still running, still had its lights on, still existed in the real world. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and drove. I didn't care about the footprints I'd seen, the photographs, the voices on the radio. I just needed to get away from that house. But as I drove, I realized something was wrong with the city around me. The streets weren't right. I should have hit Western Avenue after 3 blocks. But instead, I was passing the same abandoned grocery store for the 3rd time. The same burned-out car was on the same corner, covered in the same graffiti. The same broken streetlight flickered in the same pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS in Morse code. I was driving in circles, but I hadn't turned once. The patrol car's GPS showed me heading straight north on Cottage Grove, but my eyes told me a different story. The same abandoned building appeared again on my right. The same broken fire hydrant spraying frozen water into the air. The same graffiti tag. Willard knows, painted in red on the same brick wall. It was like the city had become a loop, a handful of blocks repeating endlessly. The fuel gauge was dropping rapidly, which didn't make sense. I'd filled up at the start of my shift only 3 hours ago, but the needle was falling as I watched, 3/4, half-quarter tank. The engine started to sputter, cough, then died completely. The patrol car rolled to a stop in the middle of the empty street, directly under that same broken streetlight. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. But the radio kept working. That was impossible. The radio system ran off the car's electrical system. No engine, no alternator, no power. But there it was, static pouring out of the speakers like water from a broken dam. And in that static, I could hear them more clearly now. The voices weren't random, they were calling roll. Officer Patricia Williams, badge 4782, end of watch March 3rd, 1987. Officer James Chen, badge 9834, end of watch December 15th, 1993. Officer Sarah Rodriguez, badge 2341, end of watch January 8th, 2001. On and on, names and dates, all officers who had died on duty. But some of the dates were wrong. Some were in the future. I heard my own name. Officer Clarence Mitchell, badge 7521. End of watch February 15th, 2019. Today's date. The time on my watch now read 2:47 a.m. Exactly what had been written under my photograph. I got out of the car. What else could I do? The temperature hit me again, but it felt different now. Less sharp, more enveloping, like sinking into dark water. The street stretched out in both directions, identical as far as I could see. The same buildings, the same abandoned cars, the same broken streetlight repeating into infinity. Then I heard Mildred's voice again, not from the radio, but from right beside me. "You should have listened, Clarence. You should have left when I told you to." I turned, and there she was, Mildred Thompson, looking exactly as she had the day she retired. Same gray hair pulled back in a bun, same reading glasses on a chain around her neck, same warm smile that had comforted countless officers over the years. But she was wearing her dispatcher's uniform, and it was covered in ice. Not frost, but actual ice, like she'd been dipped in water and flash frozen. "Mildred? How are you here? You're in Florida." She laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, Clarence. I never made it to Florida. None of us ever really leave. The city keeps us. The static keeps us. What are you talking about? What is this place? You know how radio waves work, don't you? They don't just disappear. Every transmission, every call for help, every last desperate plea, it all goes out into the universe and keeps going forever. But sometimes, when the conditions are just right, when the cold is deep enough and the barriers are thin enough, those waves come back. They overlap, they interfere with each other, they create pockets. Pockets of what? Of then, of now, of never, of always. She gestured at the repeating street around us. This is every cold night in Chicago all at once. Every officer who ever drove these streets, who ever answered a call they shouldn't have, who ever walked into a house they should have left alone. We're all here, Clarence, in the static. The buildings around us started to change. Still repeating, but now I could see through them, like they were made of glass. And inside each one I could see scenes playing out. Officers responding to calls. Some from decades ago based on their uniforms and cars. Some from years that hadn't happened yet, wearing equipment I didn't recognize. All of them walking into situations they wouldn't walk out of. "The house on Prairie Avenue," I said. "What is it?" "A focal point. A place where the static is strongest. It's been calling officers for almost 100 years. Some resist, most don't. The ones who go in either join us here or they go back changed. You've seen them, haven't you? Officers who are just a little off, who move a little too smoothly, who sometimes seem to know what's going to happen before it does, who rise through the ranks faster than they should. I thought about my Sergeant Williams, how he'd sometimes finish my sentences before I spoke them, how his eyes would sometimes reflect light like a cat's, how he'd known I was going to request time off before I'd decided to do it. They're not human anymore. They're something else. something that lives in the static but can walk in the real world. They're building something, Clarence. Have been for decades, placing their people in positions of power, not just in the police but everywhere. City government, businesses, schools. They're replacing Chicago from the inside out. Why? Because this city is special. It's always been special. The Great Fire didn't just burn buildings. It burned through reality itself, created weak spots, thin places where different worlds touch. The static beings, they want to make the whole city like this. She gestured at the repeating street. A loop, a pocket, a place outside normal time and space. Their own kingdom. A sound made us both turn. Footsteps, but not normal ones. They had a rhythm that was wrong, too regular, like a machine pretending to walk. Coming from the direction of the repeating buildings, I saw a figure approaching. It was wearing a police uniform, but as it got closer, I could see it wasn't quite right. The proportions were off. Arms too long, legs bending in too many places, and its face was static. Television snow in the shape of human features, constantly shifting and reforming. "Run," Mildred said, but there was nowhere to run to. More figures were emerging from the buildings, dozens of them, all in various police uniforms from different eras, all with those same static faces. They moved in perfect synchronization, like they were all controlled by a single mind. "There is another way," a new voice said. I turned to see another officer, this one looking human, or at least more human than the static things approaching us. She was young, maybe late 20s, wearing a uniform from the 1970s. Her badge number was 4782. "Officer Doris Freeman," she said. "I've been stuck here since 1979, but I've learned things. The static beings, they're not invincible. They have rules they have to follow, patterns they can't break." "What kind of rules?" "They can only take you if you give up. If you stop fighting, stop trying to get home. They feed on despair, on the moment when you accept that you're trapped. But if you keep moving, keep believing there's a way out, they can't fully claim you." The static officers were getting closer. I could hear them now, a sound like 1,000 radios all tuned to dead channels. "So how do we get out?" Doris smiled sadly. "We don't." "I don't. I gave up years ago. I'm part of this place now. But you still have a chance. You just have to find your anchor." "My anchor?" "Something real. Something that connects you to the world outside the static. A memory, a person, a physical object. Something that proves you exist beyond this moment." I thought about my life. 15 years on the force, a failed marriage, no kids, an apartment that was more a place to sleep than a home. What anchored me to reality? What made me real? Then I remembered. The scar on my left hand. I'd gotten it when I was 7, trying to pet a stray dog that bit me. My mother had held my hand while the doctor stitched it up, telling me stories about brave knights and dragons to distract me from the pain. That was real. That had happened. That was before I became a cop, before the job consumed everything else. I pulled off my glove and looked at my hand. The scar was there, exactly as I remembered it. A crescent moon of raised tissue between my thumb and forefinger. "Good," Doris said. "Hold on to that. Let it guide you home." The static officers stopped about 20 feet away, forming a perfect circle around us. They didn't attack, didn't advance further. They just stood there, waiting. Why aren't they coming closer? Because you haven't given up yet. They're waiting for you to break. The temperature dropped even further. I could feel the cold trying to get into my bones, into my thoughts. The static from their faces was getting louder, forming words. "Join us, Clarence." It's easier here. No more decisions, no more fear, just the eternal now. I focused on my scar, on the memory of my mother's voice, but other memories were intruding. Every bad call I'd ever responded to, every dead body I'd found, every family I'd had to notify about a loss. The weight of 15 years of witnessing humanity's worst moments. That's it, the static voices said. Remember the pain. Remember the futility. What has your service gotten you? What has your sacrifice earned? Nothing. You're alone, Clarence. You've always been alone. They were right, weren't they? What did I have to go back to? An empty apartment, a job that was slowly killing me. A city that didn't care if I lived or died as long as I kept showing up for my shift. Don't listen to them, Dora said urgently. That's how they get you. They make you forget the good moments. But what good moments? I tried to think of the last time I'd been genuinely happy, and came up empty. The job had taken everything. My marriage, my friends, my health. Maybe it would be easier to just stop fighting, to join the static, to stop feeling anything at all. The static officers took a step closer. That's when I heard it. A siren in the distance. Not from the static world, but from somewhere else. Somewhere real. It was getting closer. No, the static voices said in unison. That's impossible. A patrol car burst through one of the repeating buildings like it was made of paper. It skidded to a stop right next to me and the passenger door flew open. Get in, the driver shouted. I didn't recognize her. She was young, maybe mid-20s, African American, wearing a modern CPD uniform. Her badge read, Officer D. Washington. Who are you? Someone who's been looking for you. Get in now, or you'll be stuck here forever. I dove into the car. The moment I did, the static officers rushed forward, but they were too late. Washington floored it, and we shot forward into the darkness. How did you find me? Your car's GPS went crazy, then disappeared entirely. But I've been tracking anomalies like this for months. Officers disappearing, coming back wrong. I knew someone would eventually get stuck in a loop. You know about the static? I know enough. My grandmother was a dispatcher back in the 70s. She used to tell me stories about officers who went missing on cold nights, about voices on the radio that shouldn't exist. I thought they were just stories until I became a cop myself and started noticing the patterns. We burst through another building, and suddenly we were on a normal Chicago street, the real Chicago. I could see the Willis Tower in the distance, the lake to the east. The GPS showed us on Lower Wacker Drive, miles from where I'd been. The house on Prairie Avenue. Is being demolished tomorrow, Washington said. Emergency order from the mayor's office. They're claiming structural instability, but I think someone up high finally figured out what it really is. The static beings, they're in the department. In the city government. I know, but not all of them. There are still real people fighting back. A handful of us who know the truth. We've been working to identify the replaced ones, to stop their plan. What plan? We're not sure, but it's something big. They've been placing their people for decades, building towards something. My grandmother thought it had to do with the city's centennial. Some kind of ritual or event that would let them fully manifest, turn Chicago into a permanent static zone. We pulled into the 7th District parking lot. My patrol car was there, covered in ice, but otherwise normal. The clock on Washington's dashboard showed 5:47 a.m. I'd lost 3 hours. What do I tell them? Nothing. You had radio trouble, got lost in the storm, ended up in a dead zone. It happens. But Clarence? She handed me a card with just a phone number on it. Call me when you're ready to fight back, We need every real officer we can get. I got out of her car, walked to mine. It started on the first try, like nothing had happened. But when I looked at my left hand, there were new marks next to my childhood scar. White marks in the shape of fingerprints. Too many fingerprints. The static had touched me. I was marked now. Inside the station, everything seemed normal. Officers coming and going. The usual controlled chaos of shift change. But now I looked closer. Saw how some of them moved just a little too smoothly. How their eyes sometimes reflected light wrong. How they occasionally spoke in perfect unison without seeming to notice. Sergeant Williams was waiting for me in the briefing room. "Mitchell, where the hell have you been?" "Radio trouble, Sarge. Got turned around in the storm, ended up in a dead zone." He stared at me for a long moment. For just a second, I could have sworn I saw static flicker across his eyes. "It happens," he said finally. "Take the rest of the shift off, get some rest. And Mitchell, be more careful. The city can be dangerous on cold nights. You never know what might be out there waiting in the static." The way he said static made my blood run cold. He knew. He knew where I'd been, what I'd seen, and he was warning me to keep quiet about it. I nodded, went to my locker, changed out of my uniform. As I was leaving, I passed the dispatch center. Through the window, I could see the dispatchers at their stations, headsets on, managing the city's chaos. One of them looked up, caught my eye. It was Mildred Thompson. She smiled, waved, then went back to her console. But I'd seen her retirement party, I'd seen the pictures from Florida, and I'd seen her in the static world, frozen and transformed. Which one was real? Were any of them real? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "They're watching you now. Be careful. Trust no one. The war for Chicago has begun." I didn't go home after leaving the station. How could I? My apartment suddenly felt like a trap, a box where they could find me, corner me, make me disappear like they'd made others disappear. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the morning traffic, watching the city wake up, trying to make sense of what had happened to me. The marks on my hand throbbed with a cold that seemed to come from inside the bone. 5 white fingerprints, but the fingers that made them had too many joints. When I touched them, I could hear the static again, faint but persistent, like a radio station just out of range. I called the number Officer Washington had given me. She answered on the first ring. "Can you meet?" I asked. "Rossi's Diner on Taylor Street, 20 minutes. Rossi's was an old cop hangout, the kind of place where retired officers told war stories over coffee that had been burning since dawn. It was crowded enough that we could talk without being overheard, public enough that nothing bad could happen, or so I hoped. Washington was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall. Cop instincts die hard. Up close, in the fluorescent light of the diner, I could see she was exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, a tremor in her hands as she lifted her coffee cup. "How long have you been investigating this?" I asked, sliding into the booth across from her. 6 months. Ever since my partner came back wrong." "Came back from where?" "A wellness check on North Halsted. Routine call, elderly woman hadn't been seen in a few days. He went in alone while I handled a traffic stop down the street. When he came back 20 minutes later, he was different." "Different how?" She pulled out her phone, showed me a video. It was body cam footage from a patrol car, showing 2 officers talking. The timestamp was from 4 months ago. "Watch his shadow," she said. I watched. The officer on the left, Washington's partner presumably, was gesturing as he talked, but his shadow wasn't matching his movements. It was delayed, like it was on a different frequency. And sometimes, just for a frame or two, the shadow would have too many arms. That's not possible. That's what I said. But I started documenting everything. Every strange call, every officer who came back different, every impossible thing that happened on cold nights. And I found a pattern. She pulled out a tablet, showed me a map of Chicago covered in red dots. Every dot is an incident. An officer responding to a call and coming back changed, or not coming back at all. Look at the distribution. The dots formed a shape. Not quite a circle, but something more complex. A symbol, the same symbol I'd seen in ice on the walls of that house. It's a summoning circle, she said. Or maybe a containment circle. They've been building it for decades, one incident at a time, placing their people at specific points throughout the city. For what? I don't know. But something's happening soon. The static activity has been increasing. More officers going missing, more coming back wrong. And there's something else. She showed me another document on her tablet. It was a city planning map, showing new construction projects scheduled for the next year. Every one of these construction sites is on one of the incident points. They're building something at each location. Officially, they're cell towers, infrastructure improvements, modernization projects. But the companies doing the building? They don't exist. Shell corporations that trace back to nothing. How many people know about this? Maybe a dozen cops who've noticed something wrong. A few city officials who aren't compromised. Some academics who study urban legends and paranormal activity. We've been trying to organize, but it's hard when you don't know who to trust. The waitress came by to refill our coffees. She was an older woman, maybe 60, with the tired look of someone who'd been working service jobs her whole life. But as she poured, I noticed her shadow. It was normal, moving exactly as it should. That's when I realized I'd started checking everyone's shadow. "The house on Prairie Avenue," I said after the waitress left. "You said it was being demolished. This afternoon. Emergency order, no delays. They're not just tearing it down, they're excavating the entire lot, going down 20 feet, removing every trace. But if it's a focal point for the static, maybe that's the point. Maybe someone in power finally realized what it was and is trying to stop it. Or maybe they're harvesting it, taking whatever power is there for themselves." My phone buzzed. A text from Sergeant Williams. "Need you back at the station." Important. I showed it to Washington. She frowned. "That's not good. They never call you back the same day after an incident." "What do I do?" "You go. Act normal, but be ready for anything." She handed me something under the table. It was a small device, looked like a USB drive. Audio recorder, activated by pressure. If something happens, squeeze it. It'll record everything and upload it to a cloud server. I pocketed the device, stood to leave, then stopped. "Your partner, what happened to him?" "He's still working. Got promoted to detective last month, but sometimes, when he thinks no one's looking, I see him talking to his shadow, having full conversations with it, and his shadow talks back. The drive back to the station felt like driving into a trap. Every patrol car I passed seemed to be watching me. Every officer on the street turned to look as I went by. Even the traffic lights seemed to hold me at red longer than they should, like the city itself was controlling my movement. The station was quieter than it should be for midday. The desk sergeant barely looked up when I entered. The hallways were empty. I found Williams in his office, but he wasn't alone. There were 3 other people with him. 2 I didn't recognize, a man and woman in expensive suits. The third was Mildred Thompson. She looked exactly as she had at her retirement party 3 years ago. Not the frozen version I'd seen in the static world, but the real Mildred, except I'd seen the photos from Florida. I'd talked to officers who'd gotten postcards from her. "Clarence," she said warmly, "it's so good to see you." "Mildred," I kept my voice level. "I thought you were in Florida. I came back. Missed the Chicago winters." She laughed, but it sounded wrong, like she was remembering how laughter was supposed to sound. "These are my associates from the Chicago Heritage Foundation. They're very interested in your experience last night." The man in the suit stepped forward. He was maybe 50, gray at the temples, with the kind of aggressive handshake that people use when they're trying to establish dominance. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm David Cross, head of security for the foundation. We understand you had some unusual experiences during your shift." "Radio trouble. Got lost in the storm." "Yes, that's what you reported. But we have witnesses who saw you at 5847 South Prairie Avenue." "I don't recall." "Please, Mr. Mitchell, let's not play games." The woman spoke now. She was younger, maybe 35, with eyes that never seemed to blink. "We know you entered the house. We know what you saw. We're not here to punish you. We're here to offer you an opportunity." Williams hadn't said a word. He was just sitting at his desk, staring at nothing, like he was powered down. "What kind of opportunity?" Cross smiled. "The city is changing, Mr. Mitchell. Evolving. The old ways, the old limitations, they're ending. We're building something new, something better, and we want you to be part of it." "I don't understand." "You've seen the static world," the woman said. "You've seen what exists between the frequencies. Most people who see it are either destroyed by it or absorbed by it. But you came back. That makes you special." "Special? How?" "You're a bridge," Mildred said. "Someone who can exist in both worlds. Do you know how rare that is? How valuable?" I thought about the recorder in my pocket, resisted the urge to squeeze it. "Not yet. What do you want from me?" "Tonight," Cross said, "there's going to be an event. Something we've been planning for a very long time. We need officers we can trust at specific locations throughout the city. Officers who understand what's really happening." "And if I refuse?" The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. William still hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked. The woman's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Then you become a liability," she said simply. "And liabilities are dealt with. Your friend Eugene Morrison was a liability. Officer Torrance was a liability. That dispatcher who asked too many questions, what was her name? Patterson? She was a liability. You killed them." "We transformed them," Mildred corrected. Death is such a limited concept. They exist now in the static, part of something greater than their individual selves. It's really quite beautiful if you think about it. You're insane. Cross laughed. "Sanity is relative, Mr. Mitchell. What's sane about the way this city operates? The violence, the corruption, the endless cycle of suffering? We're offering something better. Order, purpose, unity, slavery, evolution," the woman countered. "The static beings aren't invaders, Mr. Mitchell. They're the next step. They've always been here in the spaces between, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Chicago was built on their territory, on the thin places where worlds meet. The Great Fire wasn't an accident. It was an attempt to drive them out. But they survived, adapted, learned to work with humans instead of against them. Work with or replace? Does it matter?" Mildred asked. "The end result is the same. A better Chicago, a better world. One where crime doesn't exist because everyone moves in harmony. Where suffering ends because individual consciousness merges into something greater." I squeezed the recorder. "What's the event tonight?" Cross pulled out a tablet, showed me a map. There were 13 points marked throughout the city, forming that same symbol I'd seen. At exactly midnight, officers at each of these locations will activate devices we've installed. The devices will create a resonance, a frequency that will thin the barriers between worlds. The static will pour through, transforming everyone in the city simultaneously. You're going to turn 8 million people into those things. We're going to elevate them, the woman said. Free them from the prison of individual consciousness. No more fear, no more pain, no more loneliness. Just unity. And if people resist, they won't be able to, Cross said. The frequency affects the human brain at a fundamental level. It rewrites the neural pathways, creates new connections. The process is painless and irreversible. Williams suddenly stood up, moved with that too-smooth motion I'd noticed before. When he spoke, his voice was layered, like multiple people talking at once. Officer Mitchell, you have two choices. Join us willingly and maintain some degree of your individual identity within the collective. Or resist and be absorbed completely. Either way, at 12:01 a.m., you will be one of us. I need time to think. You have until 11 p.m., Cross said. Report to the coordinates we'll send you or we'll come find you. And Mr. Mitchell? Your friend Officer Washington is being given the same choice right now. I hope you both make the right decision. They left, all except Williams, who sat back down and returned to his frozen state. I stood there for a moment, then walked out. Nobody stopped me. Nobody followed me. They were that confident in their plan. As soon as I was in my car, I called Washington. She answered, but her voice was strange. They got to you too? I asked. Yeah, 13 locations, midnight activation. We need to stop this. How? There's 13 of them and 2 of us. Not just 2, I've been making calls. There are others. Real cops who've been pretending to be converted. City workers who've been sabotaging the devices. Even some of the static beings who've developed independent consciousness and don't want the merger. Static beings who resist? Officer Freeman, the one you met in the static world. She's been fighting them from the inside for 40 years. She says there's a way to reverse the process, to sever the connection between worlds permanently. How? We have to destroy the original focal point. Not the house on Prairie Avenue. That's just one of many. The real focal point. The place where it all started. Where? The Chicago Water Tower. It's the only building that survived the Great Fire intact. Freeman says it wasn't luck. The static beings protected it because it's their anchor to this world. Destroy it, and the connection breaks. How do we destroy a historical landmark in the middle of downtown? Freeman has a plan, but we need to keep them distracted until midnight. They can't know what we're really doing. So we pretend to go along with their plan. Exactly. Show up at the coordinates, act like we're converted. Then, at 11:59, we move. It was a desperate plan, probably suicidal, but it was better than letting 8 million people get turned into static beings. Where do we meet? Millennium Park, 10 p.m. Freeman will be there. She's bringing others. How will I recognize her? Last time I saw her, she was stuck in the static world. She says you'll know her. Something about a scar and a promise. I hung up, looked at the marks on my hand. They were spreading, the white fingerprints extending up my wrist like frost on a window. The static was claiming me, slowly but inevitably. By midnight, one way or another, this would be over. I spent the rest of the day preparing. Withdrew all my savings in cash, wrote letters to people who mattered, made peace with the fact that I probably wouldn't survive the night. But if I could help save the city, maybe that was enough. Maybe that's all any cop can hope for, to make a difference, even if nobody ever knows about it. As the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the sky the color of blood and gold, I thought about all the officers who'd faced this choice before me. How many had said yes? How many had fought back? How many had simply disappeared, erased from reality like they'd never existed? The static was getting louder in my head, a constant whisper of voices calling me to join them. But underneath it, I could hear something else. My mother's voice, telling me stories about brave knights who fought impossible odds. My training instructor, drilling into us that a cop's duty is to protect and serve, no matter the cost. My own voice, taking the oath to uphold the law and defend the innocent. I looked at my scar one more time. It was still there, still real, still mine. Whatever happened tonight, I was Clarence Mitchell, Chicago police officer, and I had a job to do. Millennium Park at 10 p.m. was eerily empty. The bean reflected the city lights in distorted patterns that seemed to move on their own, creating faces in the warped metal that watched me as I walked past. The temperature had dropped again, not as cold as the previous night, but cold enough that my breath clouded in the air. I found them gathered near the crowned fountain, 5 people trying to look casual but failing. Cops always stand like cops, even when they're trying not to. Washington was there, along with 3 officers I didn't recognize, and someone in civilian clothes who had to be Freeman. She looked nothing like the young officer I'd seen in the static world. This Freeman was in her 60s, gray-haired, weathered, but her eyes were sharp and alert. When she saw me, she smiled, and I noticed she had the same scar on her left hand that I did. Different origin, probably, but the same crescent shape. "Officer Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen too much to be fazed by anything anymore. Doris Freeman. Though I suppose I'm not technically an officer anymore. Hard to stay on the force when you've been declared dead for 40 years. "How are you here?" "Last I saw, you were trapped in the static." I was. For 4 decades, but I learned things there. The static world isn't just a prison, it's a crossroads. With enough will, enough understanding of how it works, you can use it to travel. I can step in and out now, though each time costs me. She rolled up her sleeve, showing arms covered in those white fingerprint marks. They went all the way up, disappearing under her shirt. I figure I've got maybe 3 more trips before the static claims me completely. Then why waste one on this? Because this is it. Tonight, they either succeed and turn Chicago into a static colony, or we stop them once and for all. Either way, my fight ends. Washington stepped forward, all business. "We've got 7 real officers ready to act. 4 are at the target locations, pretending to be converted. They'll sabotage the devices at 11:58, buy us time. The other 3 are securing our escape route." "Escape route?" One of the unknown officers, a young Latino man with sergeant stripes, spoke up. "The water tower is surrounded by static beings. Has been for 3 days. They know it's important, even if they don't know we know. After we destroy it, we'll need to get out fast." "How do we destroy it?" I asked. "It's a historic landmark, solid stone. Survived the Great Fire." Freeman pulled out a device that looked like a modified radio, covered in symbols that hurt to look at. "This is a resonance disruptor. I built it in the static world using principles I learned from the beings themselves. It broadcasts on the exact opposite frequency of their anchor point. Think of it as noise cancellation, but for reality. That'll work? In theory. I've tested smaller versions on minor focal points, closed a few of the thin places around the city, but the water tower is the original, the strongest." It might work, or it might tear a hole in reality that swallows half of downtown. Great odds. Best we've got. The third unknown officer, an older white woman with detective's shield, checked her watch. We should move. Our covers at the activation sites are expecting us by 11:30. Wait, I said. Willard. They mentioned someone named Willard. Who is he? Freeman's face darkened. Willard Cray. He was the architect who rebuilt Chicago after the Great Fire. Except he wasn't human. He was one of the first static beings to successfully inhabit a human body long-term. Every building he designed, every street he planned, it all feeds into the symbol. The entire city is a massive summoning circle, and he's been waiting 150 years for enough population density to activate it. He's still alive? Alive isn't the right word. He exists. Moves from body to body when the old one wears out. Right now, he's wearing the mayor. That explained a lot. The sudden push for modernization, the new construction projects, the emergency demolition orders. It was all Willard preparing for tonight. So, we're not just fighting the static beings, Washington said. We're fighting the city itself. The city Willard built, Freeman corrected. But Chicago is more than his design. It's the people, the history, the spirit of the place. That's what we're really fighting for. We split up. Washington and I would go to our assigned activation site, maintain our cover until the last moment. Freeman and the others would position themselves around the water tower. At 11:59, we'd move. Our site was in an abandoned warehouse in the south side, not far from where this had all started. The device was already there. A metal tower about 15 feet tall, covered in symbols and connected to massive cables that disappeared into the floor. 3 static beings were guarding it, their faces flickering between human and television snow. Officers Mitchell and Washington, one of them said, its voice layered with harmonics. You've accepted the truth. We have, Washington lied smoothly. We're ready for the transformation. Good. You will activate the device at midnight precisely. The sequence is already programmed. Simply press the red button and join the eternal song. They left us alone with the device. Washington immediately started examining it, looking for weak points. Can you disable it? Maybe. But if I do it too early, they'll know. We have to wait until... Her phone buzzed. A text from one of our inside officers. Compromised. They know. Get out now. Before we could move, the door slammed shut. The temperature plummeted. Ice began forming on the walls, spreading in patterns that spelled out words in a language that predated human speech. Did you really think we didn't know? Willard's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Every word you've spoken, every plan you've made, we've heard it all. The static is everywhere, Officer Mitchell, in your phones, your radios, your thoughts. The static beings returned, but now there were dozens of them pouring in through walls like they were made of smoke. Washington pulled her weapon, but I knew it was useless. You can't shoot static. Freeman knew you'd betray us, I said, playing for time. This was never about the devices. Willard laughed, the sound like breaking glass. A bluff? How charmingly human. But even if Freeman could reach the water tower, she can't destroy it. It's not just stone and mortar. It's a living part of the static world now, protected by 100 years of accumulated power. She doesn't need to destroy it, Washington said, understanding. She just needs to disrupt it, even for a moment. The realization hit me. Freeman wasn't planning to escape. She was going to use her final trip into the static world to plant the disruptor directly in the tower's static echo. It would destroy her, scatter her consciousness across 1,000 frequencies, but it might work. "We need to buy her time," I whispered to Washington. She nodded, then did something I didn't expect. She pulled out a second device, identical to Freeman's disruptor but smaller. "Freeman made 3, she said. "1 for the tower, 2 for the major devices. Even if we can't stop them all, we can limit the damage." She activated it. The effect was immediate. The static beings recoiled, their forms becoming unstable, flickering between states. The device in the center of the room started sparking, its symbols fading and reforming chaotically. "No!" Willard's voice was pure rage now. "You don't understand what you're doing. Without the static, Chicago will collapse. The city needs us. We are its immune system, its soul. Chicago existed before you," I said, adding my disruptor to Washington's. The combined frequency made my teeth ache and my vision blur. "And it'll exist after you're gone." The warehouse started shaking. Not just the building, the ground beneath it. All across the city, I could hear it. Explosions, sirens, the sound of reality tearing itself apart. 11:59. Through the chaos, I heard Freeman's voice on my radio, calm and determined. "Remember us." Then the water tower exploded. Not with fire or force, but with light. Pure white light that erupted from downtown and spread across the city like a wave. When it hit the warehouse, the static beings simply ceased. They didn't disappear or fade. They just stopped existing, like they'd never been there at all. The device in the center of the room crumbled to rust and dust. The ice on the walls melted instantly, flooding the floor, and the marks on my hand, those white fingerprints that had been spreading up my arm, turned black and flaked away like old paint. Washington and I ran outside to see the city transforming. Every building Willard had designed was changing, aging decades in seconds. Some collapsed entirely. Others revealed their true forms, structures that had been hidden beneath false facades for a century. The skyline of Chicago was rewriting itself, but the people were safe, confused, terrified, but human. The static being's grand transformation had failed. My radio crackled one last time. Not with static, but with the voice of a real dispatcher. All units. We have multiple structure collapses throughout the city. Emergency protocols in effect. Respond to your assigned sectors. Washington and I looked at each other, then at our patrol cars. We had work to do, real police work. Helping people, saving lives, protecting and serving. As we drove toward downtown, I saw him standing on a street corner. Willard, in his true form. Not the mayor's body, but something older, more primitive. A figure made of architectural lines and city planning grids, slowly dissolving as the morning sun hit him. "This isn't over," he called out as we passed. "The static is eternal. We'll find another way, another city. Chicago was just the beginning." Then he was gone, scattered into the morning light like dust. The aftermath was chaos. Officially, it was the result of a massive infrastructure failure caused by a computer virus in the city's management systems. Dozens of buildings were condemned, including the Chicago Water Tower, which had somehow been completely hollowed out from the inside. The mayor resigned, citing health concerns, and was never seen again. But for those of us who knew the truth, Chicago felt different, cleaner somehow, like a fever had broken. The strange disappearances stopped. Officers who'd been converted slowly returned to normal, though most had no memory of their time under the static's influence. Freeman was never found. Officially, she'd never existed. 40 years of being declared dead will do that. But sometimes, on clear nights when the radio waves are just right, officers report hearing her voice on their radios. Not calling for help or giving warnings, just checking in. Making sure we're okay, making sure we remember. Washington and I were quietly transferred to different districts. They said it was for our own good, to help us move past the trauma of the infrastructure failure. But we knew better. There were still people in power who'd been allied with the static beings, and they wanted us separated, weakened. But we stay in touch. We monitor the frequencies, we watch for the signs. Because Willard was right about one thing. This isn't over. The static is still out there, in the spaces between, looking for another way in. And when they try again, we'll be ready. I still have the scar on my left hand, the one from the dog bite when I was 7. Next to it are new scars, white lines where the static marks used to be. They remind me that there are things beyond the normal, beyond the rational, beyond what we think we know about the world. They remind me that sometimes being a cop means protecting people from threats they can't see, can't understand, and can never know about. They remind me that on cold nights in Chicago, when the radio starts to static and the shadows move wrong, someone needs to answer the call. My name is Officer Clarence Mitchell, badge number 7521. And I guard the frequencies. The war for Chicago isn't over. It's just gotten quieter. Spring in Chicago meant two things. The snow finally melted, revealing all the garbage and grime winter had hidden, and the evidence room at the 3rd District stopped feeling like a morgue. I'd been assigned to evidence duty 6 months ago after a suspect's lucky swing with a crowbar shattered my kneecap. 22 years on the street, and a punk kid half my age had ended my patrol days with one desperate move. The department called it light duty. I called it purgatory. My name is Officer Harold Banks, and I'd spent my entire career on the North Side, watching the neighborhoods transform from working-class ethnic enclaves to gentrified playgrounds for the wealthy. The violence hadn't disappeared. It had just gotten more sophisticated, more hidden. Now, instead of chasing dealers through alleys, I cataloged the evidence of crimes I'd never solve, filing away the remnants of other officers' cases in a basement that hadn't seen natural light since the Kennedy administration. The evidence room was massive, taking up the entire basement of the precinct. Row after row of metal shelving stretched from floor to ceiling, each shelf loaded with bankers' boxes, evidence bags, and sealed containers. Some of the stuff dated back to the 1960s, cases that would never be solved, evidence that would never see a courtroom, but that we were legally required to keep. It was a graveyard of forgotten crimes, and I was its reluctant caretaker. Ethel Martinez ran the evidence room with the efficiency of a drill sergeant and the personality of a brick wall. She'd been down here for 15 years, and in that time, she'd developed a system that only she fully understood. My job was to digitize the old files, create a searchable database that would bring the department into the 21st century. It was mind-numbing work, but it kept me employed and my pension intact. That Tuesday in April started like any other. I arrived at 7 a.m., made my coffee in the ancient percolator that had probably been brewing since the Reagan years, and settled in at my desk in the corner of the evidence room. Ethel nodded at me from her station near the entrance, the only acknowledgement I'd get from her all day unless something went wrong. I was working through a section of cold cases from 1994, entering basic information into the database. Case number, victim name, crime type, investigating officer, status. Most were gang-related shootings from the bad old days when the murder rate in Chicago was twice what it is now. Young men killing other young men over corners that didn't matter anymore, wearing colors that meant nothing to the gentrifiers who lived there now. Case number 94-3843. Marcus Williams, 19, shot 3 times in the chest. No witnesses. Case number 94-3844. Luis Ramirez. 22, beaten to death, no suspects. Case number 94-32845, Tyrone Jefferson, 17, stabbed, suspected gang initiation. Case number 94-30846, unknown female, approximately 25, strangled, found in dumpster. And then case number 94-3847, Eugene Morrison, 23, missing person, never found. The box for Morrison's case was heavier than it should have been. Missing person cases usually had thin files, a report, maybe some photos, records of search efforts that went nowhere. But when I pulled the box from the shelf, it felt like it was full of bricks. Inside, along with the standard paperwork, was something that shouldn't have been there. A leather-bound journal, water-damaged and moldy, wrapped in clear plastic like someone had tried to preserve it. There was no evidence tag, no chain of custody form, nothing to indicate how it had gotten into the box or who had put it there. I should have called Ethel over immediately. Protocol was clear. Any undocumented evidence had to be reported and properly cataloged. But something about the journal made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way it had been carefully wrapped, like someone wanted it to be preserved, but not officially documented. Maybe it was the fact that it was in Eugene Morrison's file specifically, not just randomly placed. Or maybe it was just 22 years of cop instinct telling me there was a story here. I unwrapped the plastic carefully. The journal's cover was damaged but legible. Property of Eugene Morrison, written in faded ink on the inside cover. I opened it to the first entry, dated March 15, 1994. They're going to kill me. I know too much. I've seen what happens in the basement of the Riverside warehouse, the sacrifices, the summoning, the feeding. I tried to tell the police, but one of them is involved. The one who brings them the homeless, the addicts, the people nobody will miss. Badge 3847. I don't know his name, but I've seen his face. I've followed him. I've watched him mark them. I'm leaving this record in case something happens to me. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to stop them. My coffee suddenly tasted like ash. I flipped through more pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. Eugene described following this Officer 3847 to homeless camps around the city, watching him interact with the vulnerable populations there. He wrote about seeing the officer mark certain individuals with a symbol. He'd drawn it in the journal, a complex pattern of interlocking circles and lines that seemed to shift if you stared at it too long. March 18, 1994. Followed 3847 to Lower Wacker Drive, the underground area where the homeless camp in winter. He brought food, blankets, gained their trust. Marked 3 of them while pretending to check them for injuries. They have no idea what's coming. March 19, 1994. The 3 marked individuals are gone. The others in the camp say they left voluntarily, said someone offered them work. But I saw 3847's patrol car parked outside the Riverside warehouse at 3 a.m. I heard the screaming. I couldn't get close enough to see, but the smell. God, the smell was like burning meat mixed with sulfur. March 20th, 1994. I'm being followed. A black sedan, no plates. They know I know. I need to hide this journal somewhere safe. If something happens to me, check the warehouse. Check the basement. The symbol is the key. It's not just decoration. It's functional. It does something to them, changes them, makes them suitable for I don't know what. Consumption? Transformation? All I know is that Officer 3847 is feeding people to something, and the department is protecting him. The final entry was March the 22nd, 1994. This is my last entry. I'm going to the FBI office tomorrow, bypassing the local police entirely. I have photos now, evidence. But if I don't make it, if this journal is found without me, know this. The Chicago Heritage Foundation is involved. They own the warehouse. They own dozens of properties around the city, all with basements, all with that symbol somewhere on the property. And Officer 3847? I finally learned his name. It's the entry, cut off mid-sentence. The rest of the page was torn out. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what I'd read. Eugene Morrison had been investigating something in 1994, something that had gotten him killed or disappeared, and someone had hidden his journal in the evidence room, in his own missing person file, where it would only be found if someone reopened the case. I looked around the evidence room. Ethel was at her desk, typing steadily. A couple of other officers were retrieving evidence for court appearances. Everything seemed normal, mundane even, but Eugene's journal suggested something else entirely. A conspiracy within the department, murders disguised as missing persons cases, and an organization using the city's homeless as victims for some unknown purpose. The rational part of my brain, the part trained by 22 years of police work, said this was the rambling of a mentally ill person. The case file mentioned Eugene had a history of paranoid delusions, had been hospitalized twice for psychiatric evaluation. This journal could just be the product of a sick mind, seeing patterns where none existed. But the other part of my brain, the instinct that had kept me alive on the streets, said something else. It said that someone had deliberately hidden this journal where it would eventually be found. It said that Eugene's descriptions were too specific, too detailed to be pure fantasy. And it said that in a city like Chicago, where corruption ran as deep as the limestone beneath our feet, anything was possible. I stood up, journal in hand, to go find Ethel. But as I did, the fluorescent light above my desk started flickering. Not unusual in an old building, but the pattern was strange, rhythmic, almost like Morse code. And in the moments of darkness between flashes, I could swear I saw someone standing at the far end of the aisle between the shelves. "Ethel," I called out, but my voice seemed to die just a few feet from my mouth, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the evidence room. The flickering stopped, and the figure was gone. Just my imagination, probably. Too much time alone in a basement full of old crimes. But as I walked toward Ethel's desk, I noticed something else. Other boxes on the shelves, seemingly at random, had small symbols drawn on them in pencil. So faint I hadn't noticed them before, but now that I was looking, they were everywhere. The same symbol Eugene had drawn in his journal. "Ethel," I said when I reached her desk, "I found something unusual in one of the cold case boxes." She looked up from her computer, her expression unreadable behind thick glasses. "Unusual how?" I showed her the journal, explained where I'd found it. As I talked, I watched her face carefully. When I mentioned Eugene Morrison's name, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Fear? It was gone too quickly to be sure. "Harold," she said quietly, and the use of my first name immediately set off alarm bells. Ethel never used first names. "Put that back exactly where you found it. Forget you ever saw it. It's the evidence of a potential crime. Maybe multiple crimes. We have a duty to stay alive," she interrupted, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. She glanced around the evidence room, checking if anyone was within earshot. "Harold, you're 6 months from retirement. You have a bad knee that's never going to fully heal. You think you want to dig into this? You think you want to know what really happens in this city? If people are being murdered, people are murdered every day in Chicago. The only difference is whether we're allowed to investigate or not." She stood up, walked over to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, all from 1994. Eugene Morrison, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, disappeared March 22nd. His psychiatrist said he was having delusions about police conspiracies. Case closed. But the journal... What journal? I don't see any journal. You didn't find any journal. There's nothing in that box except the official case file. Her eyes were pleading now. Harold, please. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Before I could respond, the phone on her desk rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, her face going pale. "It's for you," she said, handing me the receiver. "Officer Banks?" The voice was old, raspy, like someone who'd been smoking since childhood. "Yes. Who is this?" "Someone who's been waiting 25 years for someone to find Eugene's journal. Meet me tonight, Millennium Park, by the Bean. Midnight. Come alone and bring the journal." "Who are you?" "Someone who knew Eugene. Someone who knows what really happened to him. Someone who can prove everything in that journal is true." The line went dead. I handed the phone back to Ethel. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "You knew," I said. "You knew the journal was there." "I've known for 15 years, she admitted. "Ever since I started working here. It's not the only one, Harold. There are dozens of boxes with things that shouldn't exist. Evidence of crimes that were never investigated. People who disappeared and were never looked for. All hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone stupid enough or brave enough to find them. Why didn't you report them?" She laughed bitterly. "To who?" "Half the command staff is involved. The other half is paid to look the other way. And the few honest cops left? They either learn to keep their heads down or they end up like Eugene Morrison. So you just let it continue? I survive. That's what I do. That's what we all do." She looked at me directly now, and I could see the weight of 15 years of silence in her eyes. "But you? You're different. You're already damaged goods with that knee. You're close enough to retirement that they might not bother with you. And you're stubborn enough that you might actually do something about this. They? The Chicago Heritage Foundation. They're not just a charity organization. They're something older. Something that's been in this city since the Great Fire. They own properties all over Chicago, all with basements, all with that symbol. And they have people everywhere, in the police, in city government, in the courts. Eugene found out what they were doing, and he paid the price." I picked up the journal again, feeling its weight. It was more than just paper and leather now. It was evidence of something monstrous happening in my city, under my watch for decades. "The person on the phone," I said. "Do you know who it was?" "Floyd Carpenter. He was Eugene's psychiatrist at the state hospital. He's been investigating this on his own for 25 years. If anyone can help you understand what's in that journal, it's him. Why should I trust him? Because he's still alive. In 25 years of investigating the Heritage Foundation, he's managed to stay alive. That means he knows things. It means he's careful. And it means he might be your only chance to expose this without ending up in a box in this evidence room yourself." I spent the rest of the day pretending to work, but my mind was on Eugene's journal. I photographed every page with my phone, uploaded them to 3 different cloud services, and emailed them to an encrypted account I'd set up years ago for sensitive information. If something happened to me, at least the evidence would survive. As my shift ended, I walked through the evidence room one more time, now seeing it differently. How many of these boxes contained hidden truths? How many missing persons were actually murder victims? How many cold cases were cold because someone had ordered them to be? I noticed things I'd overlooked before. Certain sections of the evidence room that Ethel always handled herself. boxes that had been moved recently despite being from cases decades old, and those symbols, drawn so faintly on seemingly random boxes. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see the pattern. They formed a map of sorts, marking boxes that contained something important, something hidden. I memorized the pattern, then left the station as normally as possible. But as I walked to my car, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. No plates, tinted windows. Just like Eugene had described in his journal, they were watching me already. The drive home was tense. The black sedan followed me for 3 blocks, then disappeared when I turned onto a busy street. But I knew they were still watching. People like that didn't give up easily. My apartment in Rogers Park was a converted loft in an old factory building. Good security, cameras everywhere, keycard access. The kind of place that made you feel safe. But as I entered the parking garage, I noticed the security camera at the entrance was pointing the wrong way. A small thing, but after 22 years as a cop, you learn that small things matter. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, my bad knee protesting every step. The stairwell was empty, but it felt watched. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that set my teeth on edge, and my footsteps echoed in ways that didn't match the architecture. My apartment door looked normal, no signs of forced entry, no scratches on the lock. But when I opened it, I knew immediately that someone had been there. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but things were wrong. A book on my coffee table was turned at a slightly different angle. The papers on my desk had been shuffled, and there was a smell in the air, cigarette smoke, though I hadn't smoked in 10 years. On my kitchen table was a manila folder I'd never seen before. I drew my off-duty weapon, a .38 revolver I'd carried since my rookie days, and cleared the apartment room by room. Empty. Whoever had been here was gone. But they'd left their message. The folder contained photographs. Black and white, grainy, but clear enough to see what they depicted. They showed Eugene Morrison, or what was left of him. The photos were dated March 23, 1994, one day after his last journal entry. He was clearly dead, his body showing signs of prolonged torture. And carved into his chest was the symbol from his journal, cut deep enough that it had to have been done while he was still alive. There was a note with the photos. This is what happens to those who dig too deep. Eugene learned this lesson. Will you? My hands were shaking as I set the photos down. This wasn't just a threat, it was proof. Proof that Eugene had been murdered, that his journal was real, that everything he'd written about was true. They'd kept these photos for 25 years, waiting for someone to find the journal, ready to deliver their warning. But they'd made a mistake. They'd given me evidence. I photographed everything, uploaded it to my cloud, accounts, then sat down to really study Eugene's journal. Now that I knew it was real, every detail mattered. The symbol appeared throughout the journal, sometimes drawn carefully, sometimes sketched hastily in margins. Eugene had been obsessed with it, convinced it was the key to understanding what was happening. He'd found it at multiple locations around the city, carved into basement walls, painted under bridges, even worked into the architectural details of certain buildings. March 17, 1994. The symbol is everywhere once you know how to look. It's in the stonework of the Chicago Theater. It's in the ironwork of the Michigan Avenue Bridge. It's even in the layout of Grant Park if you look at it from above. Someone designed this city with the symbol in mind. But why? What does it do? I pulled up a map of Chicago on my laptop, started marking the locations Eugene mentioned. When I connected them, they formed a larger version of the same symbol, centered on the loop. The Chicago Heritage Foundation's properties were all located at key points within this pattern. my phone rang. Unknown number. "Officer Banks, you're not being very smart." The voice was cultured, educated, with the kind of accent that came from old money and private schools. "We gave you a friendly warning." Most people would take the hint. Who is this? Someone who's trying to save your life. Forget about Eugene Morrison. Forget about the journal. Enjoy your retirement. Otherwise, you'll be joining Eugene sooner than you think. You killed him. We transformed him. He's part of something greater now, as are all those who've stood against us. The homeless, the forgotten, the investigators who got too close, they all serve a purpose in the end. What purpose? That's not for you to know. What you need to know is this. At midnight tonight, you have a choice. Show up at Millennium Park with the journal, hand it over to Mr. Carpenter, and walk away. Or don't show up, and we'll take it anyway, along with everything else you value. The line went dead. I looked at the clock. 8 p.m. 4 hours to decide whether to meet Floyd Carpenter or surrender to whoever had just called. But there was something else I needed to do first. I drove back to the station. The night shift was in full swing, but the evidence room was closed. I used my key card to get in, one of the few perks of being assigned there. The room was dark except for the emergency lights, casting long shadows between the shelves. I went to the section where I'd found Eugene's journal and started checking the other boxes with symbols. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Box number 87-2341. Sarah Chen, missing prostitute. Inside, photos of underground rooms filled with that symbol and a list of names. All people who disappeared from the streets. Box number 91-8934. Marcus Thompson, missing drug addict. Inside, a map showing tunnel systems under the city, all marked with the symbol. Box number 99-1256. Jennifer Rodriguez, missing runaway. Inside, medical charts describing experiments, surgical modifications, preparations for something called the joining. Box number 03-4521. William Patterson, missing homeless veteran. Inside, architectural blueprints for buildings throughout Chicago, all incorporating the symbol into their design. Dozens of boxes, dozens of victims, decades of evidence, all hidden in plain sight, gathering dust while people disappeared and nobody looked for them. The Chicago Heritage Foundation hadn't just been killing people, they'd been using them for something. The medical chart suggested biological experiments. The architectural plan suggested citywide preparation. The tunnel map suggested a hidden infrastructure beneath Chicago that nobody knew about. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, multiple sets, moving with military precision. They'd come for me here, in the station, surrounded by cops. That's how confident they were. I grabbed Eugene's journal and the most damning evidence I could carry, then looked for another exit. The evidence room had an old service tunnel that connected to the building's boiler room, a relic from when the station was built in the 1920s. Ethel had shown it to me my first week, mentioned it was useful to know about just in case. The tunnel was narrow, dark, and smelled of decades of dust and rat droppings. My knee screamed with every step, but I pushed through. Behind me, I could hear them entering the evidence room, searching systematically. I emerged in the boiler room, then made my way to the motor pool exit. The night mechanics didn't even look up as I walked past. Just another cop heading out. I got to my car and drove, checking constantly for tails. At 11:30 p.m., I arrived at Millennium Park. The Bean stood silent and imposing, reflecting the city lights in its polished surface. The park was mostly empty, except for a few late-night joggers and couples taking advantage of the mild spring weather. At exactly midnight, I saw him. An elderly man with a cane, wearing a long coat and fedora like he'd stepped out of a 1940s movie. He was sitting on a bench near the bean, feeding pigeons despite the late hour. "Mr. Carpenter?" I approached cautiously, hand near my weapon. "Officer Banks." He didn't look up from the pigeons. "You brought the journal." "I brought questions. Questions I've been trying to answer for 25 years. He finally looked at me, and I saw eyes haunted by decades of knowledge he wished he didn't have. "Sit. We don't have much time." I sat, keeping space between us. "You were Eugene's psychiatrist." I was. Brilliant young man. Not mentally ill, despite what the records say. He'd seen something that broke his understanding of the world, and I made the mistake of trying to help him make sense of it. The Heritage Foundation is older than you think. They trace their roots back to the Great Fire of 1871. Some say they caused it. Others say they were formed because of it. Either way, they've been shaping Chicago ever since. Shaping it how? Floyd pulled out a folder of his own, handed it to me. Inside were historical documents, newspaper clippings, photographs spanning over a century. The symbol Eugene found. It's not decoration, it's functional. It's what they call a gathering sigil. When arranged properly throughout a city, it creates a network, a web that collects something. Energy, souls, consciousness, I'm not sure exactly what, but I know what they do with it. He showed me a photograph from 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition. In the background of a crowd shot, barely visible, were figures that didn't look quite right. Too tall, limbs too long, faces blurred, even though everything else in the photo was sharp. "They're not human," Floyd said simply, "or at least not anymore. The Foundation serves them, has served them since the fire. In exchange, they get power, wealth, influence, and all they have to do is provide raw material. The homeless, the forgotten, the people nobody misses." Eugene figured it out. He traced the disappearances, found the pattern. Every year, hundreds of people vanish from Chicago's streets. Most are assumed to have moved on, died somewhere unnoticed, or simply been lost in the system. But Eugene knew better. He found where they were being taken. The warehouse he mentioned. One of many. The Foundation owns properties throughout the city, all connected by old tunnels, some dating back to the original sewer system. They take people underground, prepare them with that symbol, and then what? Floyd was quiet for a moment. "Have you ever heard of the Chicago Pedway? The underground walkway system downtown? That's what it is now. But it was built on something much older. Tunnels that existed before the fire expanded after it, connecting every major building in the loop. The public only has access to a small portion. The rest belongs to the Foundation. And down there, in the deepest parts, that's where they do it." Do what? The joining. They merge human consciousness with something else. The beings they serve need hosts to interact with our world. But not just any host. The human has to be prepared, modified, marked with the symbol. Eugene saw the early stages of the process. The screaming he heard, that was the transformation beginning. I thought about the medical charts I'd found in the evidence room. Surgical modifications, preparations. It all made horrible sense. Why hasn't anyone stopped them? Because they're everywhere. Police, government, business. They've had 150 years to infiltrate every level of Chicago society. And anyone who tries to expose them ends up like Eugene. Or worse, some don't die, some get transformed and sent back, looking the same but fundamentally changed. They become servants of the Foundation, protecting its secrets. A cold wind blew across the park, and I noticed we weren't alone anymore. Figures were approaching from multiple directions, moving with purpose. "They're here," Floyd said calmly. "They always knew we'd meet." This was never about stopping us. It was about finding out how much we knew. "Then why did you come?" "Because I'm dying anyway. Cancer. Few months left at most. But you're not. You can still do something with this information." He pressed something into my hand, a flash drive. 25 years of research. Every disappearance, every property, every name I've connected to the Foundation. It's all there. Get it to someone who can use it. FBI, NSA, someone outside Chicago's influence. The figures were closer now. I could see they were wearing police uniforms, but something was wrong with how they moved. Too synchronized, like they were all controlled by a single mind. "Run," Floyd said. "I'll buy you time." "They'll kill you. I told you I'm already dead." He stood up, faced the approaching figures. "Go!" I ran. Behind me, I heard Floyd shout, something in a language I didn't recognize, followed by screams that didn't sound human. I didn't look back. My car was where I'd left it, but as I approached, I saw someone sitting in the passenger seat. "Ethel." "Get in," she said. "We need to talk." I got in, started the engine, pulled out fast. In the rearview mirror, I could see lights and activity around the bean, but no pursuit. "You knew this would happen," I said. "I knew you'd need help. Floyd's sacrifice won't mean anything if you don't survive the night." "How do I know you're not one of them?" She rolled up her sleeve, showed me her arm covered in scars. Not random scars, deliberate cuts in the shape of the symbol, but backwards, inverted. "This is the only way to resist them," she said. "The inverse symbol. It protects you from transformation, but the protection has to be renewed regularly. The pain reminds you you're human. Jesus Christ. He has nothing to do with this. This is older than Christianity, older than any religion we know. These things were here before humans, and they want their world back. So, what do? We survive tonight. Then we figure out how to fight back. There are others like us, people who know the truth and refuse to accept it. We've been preparing for something like this." She directed me to a safe house in Chinatown, a restaurant that was closed for renovations. We went in through the back, down to a basement that shouldn't exist according to city records. Inside were others, maybe a dozen people, all bearing the inverted symbol somewhere on their bodies. Some were cops, others civilians. All had the same haunted look in their eyes. "Welcome to the resistance," Ethel said. "Such as it is." A younger woman, maybe 30, approached us. "Did you get Floyd's research?" I handed over the flash drive. She plugged it into a laptop, started scrolling through files. "This is it," she breathed. "This is what we needed. Names, dates, locations. We can map their entire network." "And then what?" I asked. "Then we burn it down," she said. "Every property, every tunnel, every symbol in this city. We destroy their infrastructure and we free Chicago. They'll kill us all." "Maybe." But Eugene Morrison died trying to expose them. Floyd Carpenter died to get us this information. How many others have died that we don't even know about? At some point, someone has to stand up and say enough. I looked around the room at these people, these ordinary citizens who discovered an extraordinary truth and chose to fight rather than submit. My knee hurt, my career was effectively over, and I was probably going to die badly. But Eugene's journal had started something that needed to be finished. "What do you need me to do?" Ethel smiled, the first genuine expression I'd ever seen from her. First, we teach you how to use the inverted symbol. Then, we go back to the evidence room. There are more boxes to open, more evidence to gather. The Foundation has been keeping trophies of their victims. Time to turn their arrogance against them. Outside, I could hear sirens in the distance. The city was waking up to something happening at Millennium Park. Tomorrow, the news would report it as a gas leak or a simple assault. The truth would be buried, as always. But down in this basement, surrounded by people who refused to forget, the truth lived on. Eugene Morrison's journal had lit a spark. Now, it was time to see if we could turn it into a fire. The war for Chicago's soul had begun. And I was right in the middle of it. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation and revelation. The safe house in Chinatown became our base of operations, and I learned more about Chicago's hidden history than I'd ever wanted to know. The young woman who'd taken Floyd's flash drive was named Amy Chen, no relation to the missing Sarah Chen from the evidence files, though she'd started investigating because of the shared surname. She was a computer programmer by day, urban explorer by night, and had stumbled onto the Foundation's network while mapping Chicago's abandoned tunnel systems. "The tunnels are the key," she explained, projecting a map onto the basement wall. "The Chicago pedway that tourists use? That's maybe 5% of what's actually down there. There are freight tunnels from the early 1900s, coal tunnels from before that, and something else. Something older." The map showed a labyrinth beneath the city, layers upon layers of passages. Some were documented in city records. Most weren't. And at certain intersection points, Amy had marked the symbol. "These are the nodes," she said, "places where multiple tunnel systems connect. The Foundation has been building something at each node for decades. Based on Floyd's research and what we've gathered, we think they're close to completing it." "Completing what?" I asked. "A citywide version of the symbol. Think of Chicago as a circuit board and the symbol as the circuit. Once it's complete, they can activate it." "And do what?" "Transform the entire city at once. Every person above these tunnels, which is basically everyone in the loop and most of the north and south sides, would be exposed to whatever force the symbol channels." The room fell silent as we absorbed this. 8 million people, transformed into God knows what, all at once. "When?" someone asked. "Based on the construction schedules Floyd documented, maybe a month, maybe less." Ethel had been quiet during the briefing, but now she stood up. "Then we need those evidence boxes. Not just for proof, but for intelligence. The Foundation has been documenting their work for over a century. They're arrogant enough to keep records. We find those records. We find their weaknesses." That night, I went back to the evidence room. The station was quiet at 3 a.m., just a skeleton crew manning the desks. I used my key card, disabled the new cameras they'd installed since my last visit, and got to work. Box by box, I went through the marked evidence. What I found painted a picture of systematic horror that had been happening under our noses for over a century. 1873. Mass disappearance of Chinese immigrants, blamed on gang violence. Reality. First documented use of the symbol for mass transformation. 1886. Haymarket riot. Official story. Labor demonstration turned violent. Reality. Foundation's attempt to eliminate union organizers who'd discovered their tunnels. 1915. Eastland disaster. Official story. Ship capsized due to design flaws. Reality. Foundation experiment with water-based symbol transmission gone wrong. 1955 to 1975. Hundreds of black families disappearing during urban renewal. Reality. Foundation using city planning to create the symbol on a massive scale. Every major tragedy in Chicago's history had the Foundation's fingerprints on it. They'd been using the city as a laboratory, its people as test subjects, for 150 years. But I also found something else. In a box from 1968, there was a journal much like Eugene's. Written by a cop named Daniel Kowalski, it documented his discovery of the Foundation and his attempts to stop them. But unlike Eugene, Kowalski had found something. The symbol has an inverse, he'd written. Not just backwards, but dimensionally inverted. If the symbol opens doorways, the inverse closes them. If the symbol transforms, the inverse protects. I've tested it, it works. But the cost? The journal ended abruptly, but there was a photograph. Kowalski, standing in what looked like one of the tunnels, surrounded by bodies. Foundation members, based on their clothing. And on the tunnel wall behind him, the inverted symbol drawn in what looked like blood. I photographed everything, then heard footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with that synchronized gait I'd learned to recognize. They'd found me. I grabbed what I could carry and headed for the service tunnel. But this time, they were ready. As I entered the tunnel, lights blazed to life. They'd installed new lighting, turning my escape route into a trap. At the far end of the tunnel stood Sergeant Williams, my old supervisor from before the knee injury. But something was wrong with him. His eyes reflected the light like a cat's, and when he smiled, there were too many teeth. "Harold," he said, his voice layered with harmonics that shouldn't come from a human throat. "You've been very busy." "Just doing my job." "Your job was to digitize files and keep quiet. You've failed at both." Behind me, I heard others entering the tunnel. I was trapped. "You're going to kill me like you killed Eugene." Eugene was wasteful, a rushed job. We've refined our process since then. Williams stepped forward, and I could see the symbol glowing faintly under his skin, like subcutaneous circuitry. "You'll be transformed, Harold. Become part of something greater. Your knowledge, your connections, your access, all very useful to us. I'll die first. That's the beautiful part. You will die, and then you'll be reborn." He lunged at me, moving faster than any human should, but 22 years of street experience kicked in. I dodged, pulled my revolver, and fired. The bullet hit him center mass, but he didn't go down. Black blood oozed from the wound, and he laughed. "Bullets don't work on us anymore, Harold. We've evolved past such crude weapons." But I hadn't been aiming to kill him. The bullet had hit the new electrical junction box they'd installed for the lights. Sparks flew, the lights died, and we were plunged into darkness. I ran. In the dark, my knowledge of the tunnel was an advantage. I could hear them behind me, moving by sound and smell or whatever senses they used. But I knew every turn, every obstacle. I made it to the boiler room, then up into the station proper. The night shift cops looked up in surprise as I burst into the bullpen, disheveled and desperate. "We need to evacuate the building," I shouted. "Gas leak in the basement." It was a lie, but it worked. Alarms went off, and officers started moving. In the chaos, I slipped out and made it to my car. As I drove away, I saw Williams and the others emerging from the station, watching me go. They couldn't pursue, not with so many witnesses around. I made it back to the safe house, but I knew we were running out of time. They knew about me now, knew what I'd taken. They'd accelerate their timeline. Amy was waiting with news of her own. I've been analyzing the construction patterns. They're not just building the symbol, they're building a machine. Each node in the tunnel system has components. Generators, transmitters. Things I don't even recognize. When activated together, they'll create a field that covers most of Chicago. Can we stop it? Maybe. If we can destroy enough nodes, the circuit breaks. but we'd need to hit at least 7 of the 13 simultaneously, or they'll just reroute the power. How many people do we have? 32 confirmed, maybe a dozen more sympathizers who might help. Not enough, not nearly enough. That's when Ethel spoke up. There's another way. Kowalski's journal mentioned the inverse symbol. What if we don't destroy their circuit? What if we invert it? That's insane, Amy said. We'd need to physically alter every node, replace their symbols with the inverse. It would take weeks. Not replace, Ethel said. Overlay. The inverse doesn't destroy the original. It negates it. We paint the inverse over their symbols at key points, and when they activate their machine, it backfires, I finished. Instead of transforming the city, it transforms them. It was desperate, probably suicidal, but it was a plan. We spent the rest of the night preparing. Amy mapped out the critical nodes. Others gathered supplies, special paint that would adhere to any surface, templates for the inverse symbol, weapons that might work against the transformed. I studied Kowalski's journal, learning the precise geometry of the inverse. It wasn't just the symbol backwards. It was a 3-dimensional inversion, requiring specific proportions and angles. Get it wrong, and it would do nothing. Or worse, enhance the original. The next day, I got a call on my official phone. It was the chief of police himself. Officer Banks, I understand you've been working on some cold cases. Just doing my job, sir. Good man. I'd like you to bring everything you found to my office, today. We're very interested in your diligence. It was a summons I couldn't refuse. Not showing up would confirm their suspicions, force them to act openly. But walking into that office would be walking into a trap. I'll be there at 2 p.m., sir. I had 6 hours. We moved fast. 7 teams, each targeting a critical node. I would go to the chief's office, act as a distraction while the others worked. If we were lucky, we'd have the inverse symbols in place before they realized what was happening. I gave Amy the rest of Eugene's journal, Floyd's flash drive, and everything I'd photographed. If this goes wrong, get it to the media, the FBI, anyone who'll listen. It won't go wrong, she said. But her eyes said otherwise. At 1:45 p.m., I put on my dress uniform, holstered my weapon, and drove to police headquarters. The building looked normal from the outside, but I could feel it now, the wrongness that permeated the place. How many of the people inside were still human? How many were like Williams, transformed and serving the Foundation? The chief's office was on the top floor, with a view of the entire city. He was waiting for me, along with 3 others I didn't recognize. All of them had that same wrong quality, movements too smooth, eyes that reflected light, smiles with too many teeth. Officer Banks, the chief said, please sit. I remained standing. I prefer to stand. Bad knee. Of course. The injury that put you in the evidence room. Fortuitous, wasn't it? All those boxes, all those secrets, just waiting for someone curious enough to look. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing much more than that. He stood up, walked to the window. Look at this city, Harold. 8 million people living their lives completely unaware of what's coming. In 72 hours, Chicago will undergo a transformation unlike anything in human history. You moved up the timeline. You forced our hand. But it's ready enough. The nodes are powered, the symbols are carved, the circuit is complete. All we need is to flip the switch. And turn everyone into monsters like you? He turned to face me, and for a moment, his human disguise slipped. Underneath was something that had never been human. Too many eyes, too many mouths, angles that hurt to perceive. Not monsters, Harold. Evolved, The next step in consciousness. No more individual suffering, no more loneliness, no more fear. Just unity, purpose, peace, slavery. Is a bee enslaved to its hive? Is a cell enslaved to its body? We're offering humanity a chance to become part of something greater. My phone buzzed. A text from Amy. 5 nodes complete. 2 to go. The chief noticed my distraction. Waiting for something, Harold? Just wondering how long this sales pitch will last. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You think your little resistance matters? 32 people against the power we've accumulated over 150 years. You've already lost. Another buzz. All nodes complete. Inverse symbols in place. I smiled. You're right. We've lost. So what happens now? Now you become one of us, willingly or not. They moved toward me, all 4 of them, their human shapes beginning to dissolve. But I'd been expecting this. I pulled out Kowalski's journal, opened to a page where he'd drawn the inverse symbol in his own blood. The reaction was immediate. They recoiled, their forms writhing in visible pain. The chief screamed in that multitonal voice, "What is that?" "Your mistake," I said. "You kept trophies, evidence, records. You thought you were documenting your triumph, but you were giving us the keys to your defeat." Alarms started going off throughout the building. Not fire alarms, something else. A deep, resonant tone that made the windows vibrate. "The nodes," one of them screamed. "Something's wrong with the nodes." The chief lunged at me, his form now completely inhuman. But before he could reach me, the building shook. Not an earthquake, something else. The symbol network was activating but wrong, inverted, reversed. Through the window, I could see pillars of light erupting from points throughout the city. Not the sickly green the Foundation had planned, but brilliant white. The inverse symbols were working, turning their own weapon against them. The chief and his companions writhed on the floor, their forms breaking apart like static on a dying television. Throughout the building I could hear similar screams. Every transformed being in the city was being affected. "You don't know what you've done," the chief gasped, his voice fading. "Without us, without the control we provide, this city will tear itself apart." "Maybe," I said, "but it'll be human beings making that choice, not your puppets." He dissolved into shadow and static, leaving only a faint burnt smell behind. Throughout the building, throughout the city, others like him were meeting the same fate. I walked out of police headquarters unopposed. The human officers were confused, but unharmed. The transformed ones were simply gone, erased by their own inverted network. The official story would be different, of course. Gas leak explosions throughout the city, mass hallucinations caused by chemical exposure, gang warfare, anything but the truth. But we knew. The 32 of us who'd fought back. We'd won for now. The aftermath was chaos, but controlled chaos. Within hours, the city's emergency response systems kicked in. The official narrative was already being crafted. A series of underground gas explosions caused by aging infrastructure. The pillars of light, electrical discharge from damaged power lines. The missing city officials, evacuated for safety, whereabouts temporarily unknown for security reasons. I met the others back at the safe house. We'd all survived, though barely. Several had encountered transformed beings during the node operations and bore the scars to prove it. But we'd done it. The inverse symbols had worked. Amy was at her computer, monitoring news feeds and emergency channels. "It's working," she said, exhausted but triumphant. Every location where a transformed being was stationed is reporting them missing. The mayor, the police chief, dozen of high-ranking officials, all gone. The question is, Ethel said. What happens now? We've removed the Foundation's leadership, but the organization itself still exists. The buildings, the tunnels, the resources. She was right. We'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. The Chicago Heritage Foundation had been building its power for 150 years. Even without their transformed leaders, they had human collaborators, massive wealth, and institutional knowledge we could only guess at. My phone rang. The number was blocked. Officer Banks. The voice was different this time. Younger, nervous. Who is this? My name is David Sullivan. I was an accountant for the Chicago Heritage Foundation. I know you're responsible for what happened today. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. I'm not with them, not really. They hired me 5 years ago to manage their finances. I didn't know what they were until recently. When I found out, I tried to leave, but they said they'd kill my family if I did. But now, with the leadership gone, I have a window. I want to help. How do I know this isn't a trap? Because I have access to everything. Every property they own, every bank account, every shell company. 43 buildings in Chicago alone. 17 billion in assets and complete records of every person they've taken for the last 50 years. It's all in their servers, and I have the access codes. Everyone in the room was listening now. This was exactly what we needed. What do you want in exchange? Protection for my family and immunity from prosecution. I was just an accountant. I never hurt anyone. I looked at the others. Amy nodded. Where do we meet? Foundation headquarters, the Rookery building, downtown. Their servers are in a basement level that doesn't appear on any city plans. I can get you in, but it has to be tonight. They're already mobilizing their human assets to secure everything. The Rookery building, one of Chicago's most historic landmarks, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Of course, the Foundation would hide there, in plain sight, in a building every tourist photographed. We assembled a team quickly. Amy for the technical side, 2 of our best fighters in case things went wrong, and me. Ethel stayed behind to coordinate and call for help if needed. Downtown was in chaos from the gas explosions, which worked in our favor. Police were everywhere, but they were focused on crowd control and emergency response, not on 5 people entering an office building. Sullivan met us at a service entrance. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 30, thin and nervous, sweating despite the cool night. Thank you for coming, he said, hands shaking as he unlocked the door. I've disabled the security cameras, but we need to move fast. The board of directors is meeting at midnight to figure out what happened to the transformed leadership. The board? 12 of Chicago's most powerful people. Old families, old money, all serving the Foundation for generations. They're human, but they knew everything, approved everything. We followed him through marble corridors and downstairs that got progressively older the deeper we went. From 1880s architecture to something that predated the fire, carved stone that belonged to a different Chicago entirely. The server room was behind a door marked only with the symbol. Sullivan entered a code, and it opened to reveal a room that shouldn't exist. Modern servers humming next to artifacts that looked ancient. Computer screens displaying data alongside stone tablets covered in hieroglyphs. The old and new existing side by side. Everything's here, Sullivan said, pulling out a portable drive. But it's too much to copy. Petabytes of data. You'll need to pick what's most important. Amy got to work immediately, fingers flying over keyboards. Personnel files, financial records, property deeds, victim lists. God, there's so much. That's when we heard them. Footsteps above us, many of them moving with purpose. The board, Sullivan whispered, face pale. They're early. How many exits? I asked. Just the one we came through. We were trapped. Keep downloading, I told Amy. Get everything you can. I positioned our fighters at the door while I explored the room. There had to be another way out. Places like this always had escape routes. That's when I saw it. Behind one of the ancient stone tablets, barely visible, the inverse symbol, carved into the wall. But older than Kowalski's discovery. Someone else had fought the Foundation before, maybe centuries ago. I pressed my hand against it, and the wall shifted. A passage opened, leading into the tunnel system. Amy, how much longer? 5 minutes for the critical files. Above us, the footsteps had stopped. They knew we were here. The door exploded inward. Not blown open, dissolved, the metal turning to rust in seconds. Through the doorway came not the board of directors, but something worse. Foundation security, armed with weapons I didn't recognize. Not guns, something that hummed with the same frequency as the symbol. Our fighters opened fire, but their bullets seemed to slow in midair, dropping harmlessly to the floor. The security team advanced, their weapons charging with a sound that made my teeth ache. Now would be good, Amy. 30 seconds. We didn't have 30 seconds. I grabbed Eugene's journal from my jacket, opened it to the page with the symbol drawn in his blood. It had worked on the transformed beings, maybe it would work here. I held it up, and the security team hesitated. Their weapons powered down slightly, the hum decreasing. They were human, but they'd been exposed to the symbol's power long enough that the inverse affected them. Got it. Amy yanked the drive out and we ran for the passage. The tunnels were a maze, but Sullivan knew them. The Foundation used these for transportation. They connect to every building they own. We ran through passages that looked ancient, past intersections marked with symbols that hurt to look at, downstairs carved from solid rock. Behind us, we could hear pursuit, but they were cautious, afraid of what we might have learned. What we might do. We emerged in the basement of Union Station. Sullivan had been right. The tunnels went everywhere. We blended into the crowd of late-night travelers and disappeared into the city. Back at the safe house, Amy plugged in the drive. What we found exceeded our worst expectations. 50 years of systematic kidnapping and murder. Lists of every person taken, what was done to them, where their remains were disposed of. Financial records showing bribes to judges, police commissioners, mayors, contracts with construction companies to build the node network, plans for expansion to other cities, New York, Los Angeles, Houston. The Foundation hadn't just been planning to transform Chicago, they'd been planning to transform America. But we also found something else. Records of previous resistances. In 1871, before the Great Fire. In 1934, during the Depression. In 1968, during the riots. Each time, people had discovered the truth and fought back. Each time, they'd been partially successful, setting the Foundation back decades. But each time, the Foundation had returned, adapted, continued. We were just the latest in a long line of people who'd stood against them. And like those before us, we'd won a temporary victory. We need to release this, Amy said. All of it. Make it impossible to cover up. They'll call us crazy, someone pointed out. Conspiracy theorists. Some will, but the families of the victims will know the truth. The FBI will have to investigate. The media will dig. Even if only 10% believe it, that's enough to watch for them when they try to return. We spent the next week preparing. Packages of evidence sent to journalists, law enforcement, families of victims. We created websites, uploaded documents, made it impossible to suppress everything. The response was immediate and predictable. We were dismissed as cranks. The documents called elaborate forgeries. But some people listened, some investigated, and slowly, cracks appeared in the foundation's structure. Buildings were raided. Shell companies were exposed. Bank accounts were frozen. It wasn't enough to destroy them completely, but it was enough to cripple them, for now. As for me, I retired quietly. My knee gave me the excuse I needed. I moved to a small town outside Chicago, somewhere the Foundation's influence didn't reach. But I kept Eugene's journal, and I kept watching. Because Ethel was right about one thing. Chicago is more than just a city. It's an idea, a spirit, a living thing. And living things can be infected. The Foundation was a disease that had plagued Chicago for 150 years. We'd managed to send it into remission, but diseases have a way of coming back. Sometimes late at night I get calls. Wrong numbers, they say, but I recognize the pattern. Other cities, other officers, finding their own versions of Eugene's journal. The Foundation is still out there, wounded, but not dead. Adapting, evolving, planning, but so are we. The resistance Sullivan's documents revealed wasn't just in Chicago. Every city the Foundation had tried to expand to had people who'd fought back. We're connecting now, sharing information, watching for signs of their return. Eugene Morrison died believing he was alone in his fight. Floyd Carpenter spent 25 years thinking he was the only one who knew the truth. But they weren't alone. None of us are. The evidence room at the 3rd District has been sealed. Officially, it's being renovated. Unofficially, they're afraid to open those boxes, afraid of what other truths might be hidden there. But I made copies of everything. And someday, when the time is right, when the Foundation tries to rise again, those truths will see the light. My name is Harold Banks. I was a Chicago police officer for 22 years. I served and protected, even when I didn't fully understand what I was protecting people from. And, though I'm retired now, I'm still watching, still protecting, still remembering Eugene Morrison and his journal that started it all. Because in Chicago, some cases never really close. They just wait for the right moment to reopen themselves. And when they do, someone needs to be ready. The Foundation will be back. They always come back. But next time, we'll be waiting. Next time, we'll be ready. And next time, maybe we'll end them for good. October in Chicago meant two things: the last gasps of warmth before winter set in, and the beginning of what we called the dark season on the force. Shorter days meant longer nights, and longer nights meant more of everything that made a cop's life difficult. More domestics, more drunk drivers, more of that particular brand of crazy that seemed to bloom in the darkness like mushrooms. My name is Officer Wallace Reed, and after 18 years with the Chicago PD, I thought I'd seen every kind of traffic stop there was. Gangbangers with trunks full of weapons, soccer moms high on prescription pills, businessmen trying to bribe their way out of DUIs. The job had become routine, mechanical even. Pull them over, run the plates, check the license, write the ticket or make the arrest, move on. It was a dance I'd done thousands of times. That Tuesday night in October started like any other. I was working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, patrolling the stretch of Interstate 94 that ran through the South Side. It was a trouble spot, close enough to downtown that people drove fast, far enough from the nice neighborhoods that anything could happen. The scanner had been quiet, except for the usual check-ins and a couple of domestic calls that other units were handling. At 2:17 a.m., I was parked in a median turnaround, watching for speeders and drunks coming back from the bars. The highway was mostly empty, just the occasional semi-truck and the odd car. I was thinking about the coffee in my thermos, debating whether it was worth the heartburn when I saw it. A car doing at least 90 in a 65 zone, weaving slightly between lanes. not dramatically, but enough to catch my trained eye. Possible DUI. I flipped on my lights and pulled out after it. The car was a 2015 Honda Civic, silver, with Illinois plates. Nothing special about it except for how filthy it was, covered in mud and dirt like it had been driven through a construction site. As I followed it, waiting for the driver to notice my lights and pull over, I ran the plates. The registration came back to a Blanche Morrison from Cicero. No warrants, no tickets, clean record. But something about the way the car was moving bothered me. It wasn't the weaving of a drunk driver or the aggressive lane changes of someone running from something. It was more like the driver couldn't decide where they wanted to be, constantly making minor adjustments that served no purpose. Finally, after almost a mile, the car started to slow and pull onto the shoulder. I radioed in my location, mile marker 42, southbound side, and prepared for a routine stop. I should have paid more attention to the silence that followed my call. Usually, dispatch acknowledged, even if it was just a brief copy. But there was nothing, just dead air. I approached the vehicle with my flashlight in my left hand, right hand resting on my weapon out of habit. The driver's window was already rolling down as I got close, which was unusual. Most people waited until you tapped on the glass. "License and registration, please," I said, shining my light into the car. The driver was a woman, maybe 45, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing what looked like medical scrubs under a heavy jacket. Her hands were on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, perfectly positioned, but they were shaking. Not the nervous shake of someone getting pulled over, but something else. "Fear, officer," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, you need to let me go. Ma'am, I need to see your license and registration." She closed her eyes for a moment, then reached for her purse in the passenger seat. As she did, my flashlight caught something in the back seat. At first, I thought it was a pile of clothes, but then I saw movement, breathing. "Ma'am, who's in the back seat?" "No one," she said quickly, too quickly. "It's just laundry." I shifted position to get a better angle and saw what was really there. A man lying across the back seat, covered partially by a blanket. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and there was something wrong with his mouth. It was moving, but no sound was coming out. "Sir, are you okay?" I called out, but he didn't respond, didn't even blink. "Please," Blanche said again, and now there were tears running down her face. "You don't understand. I have to keep driving. If I stop for too long, he'll—" The man in the back seat sat up. It was sudden, unnatural, like a marionette being yanked upright by its strings. His head turned toward me with a mechanical precision that made my skin crawl. When he smiled, I saw that his mouth had been sewn shut with what looked like fishing line. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle, now." "I can't," she sobbed. "He won't let me. I've been driving for 3 days. He won't let me stop." I drew my weapon, kept it low but ready. "Sir, keep your hands where I can see them." The man raised his hands slowly, and I saw they were covered in blood. Fresh blood. But he was still smiling behind those sewn lips, and his eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like pools of oil. "Dispatch, I need backup at mile marker 42, I said into my radio. But instead of dispatch, I heard something else. Laughter. Multiple voices laughing, but muffled, like they were speaking through fabric. The man in the back seat reached for something, and I raised my weapon. "Don't move!" But he wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for his mouth. His fingers found the fishing line and he started to pull. The skin tore as the stitches came loose, blood running down his chin, but he kept pulling, kept smiling. When his mouth finally opened, he spoke in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Officer Wallace Reed, badge number 8934, 18 years of service, lives alone at 4827 North Ashland. No family, no one to miss you. How did he know that? How could he possibly know that? Vernon knows everything, Blanche whispered. He's been in my car for 3 days, and he knows everything about everyone we pass. That's why I can't stop. Every time I try, he tells me something else, something worse. Vernon, if that was his name, tilted his head at an impossible angle, vertebrae popping audibly. Would you like to know how you die, Officer Reed? Would you like to know the exact date and time? I can see it. It's written in the angles of your bones, the rhythm of your heartbeat. Sir, you're under arrest. Step out of the vehicle slowly. He laughed, and blood sprayed from his ruined mouth. You can't arrest me, officer. I'm not really here. This body is just a costume, a meat puppet I'm wearing for fun. The real me is so much worse. He moved then, faster than should have been possible, lunging toward the front seat. Blanche screamed and hit the gas, the car lurching forward. I had a split second to jump back or be clipped by the vehicle. I chose to jump, landed hard on the shoulder, and watched the Honda speed away into the night. I ran back to my patrol car, called it in again. This time, dispatch answered, but they sounded confused. Unit 23, you've been silent for 40 minutes. Where are you? 40 minutes? The stop had taken 5 minutes at most. Mile marker 42 southbound. I need backup and an APB on a silver Honda Civic license plate. I rattled off the information, then added, possible kidnapping in progress. Copy that, units responding. Are you in pursuit? I started my car, pulled onto the highway. The Honda's taillights were barely visible in the distance. Affirm. The radio exploded with static, then voices. Dozens of voices, all talking at once. I could pick out words here and there. Don't follow. Turn back. He's waiting. Vernon sees you. I turned the radio off, then back on. Normal dispatch chatter returned. Unit 23, did you copy? Radio trouble. I'm in pursuit southbound. I pushed the patrol car up to 90, then 100. The Honda was maintaining its distance, still weaving between lanes. We passed 3 exits without them attempting to leave the highway. Other cars pulled aside as we flew past, a few probably calling 911 to report the chase. Then, without warning, the Honda swerved across 3 lanes and took an exit at the last second. I had to brake hard, tires screaming, to make the turn. We were off the highway now, on surface streets in an industrial area I didn't recognize. Warehouses and factories, all dark, all seemingly abandoned. The Honda ran a red light, and I followed. Then another. We were deep in a maze of empty streets now, and I realized I had no idea where we were. My GPS was showing an error message, the screen flickering between different locations like it couldn't get a fix. Finally, the Honda pulled into a warehouse parking lot and stopped. Just stopped, engine still running, lights still on. I pulled in behind it, called in my location as best I could determine it, and approached again, weapon drawn this time. The driver's door was open. Blanche was gone, but Vernon was still in the back seat, that horrible smile stretching his ruined mouth. She ran, he said conversationally. They always run eventually, but running doesn't help. I'm not actually in the car, you see. I'm in her head, in your head now, too. Step out of the vehicle. With pleasure. He opened the door and unfolded from the back seat. He was taller than he'd looked lying down, maybe 6'4", wearing a dark suit that looked like it had been buried and dug up. His movements were wrong, joints bending in ways that made my eyes water trying to track them. "You're probably wondering what I am," he said, taking a step toward me. "Stop right there." He stopped, but his smile widened. "I'm a question, Officer Reed." A question that was never supposed to be asked. What happens to the mind of a city? All those millions of thoughts, all that fear and anger and desperation, where does it go? It pools, officer. It collects in the dark places, the abandoned places, and sometimes, just sometimes, it develops consciousness. "You're under arrest for kidnapping." He laughed. "I didn't kidnap anyone." Blanche picked me up 3 days ago. She thought I was a hitchhiker who needed help. But the moment I got in her car, she understood what I really was. The embodiment of every bad decision, every wrong turn, every moment of "I shouldn't have stopped for that person." I'm every parent's warning about talking to strangers given form. I heard sirens in the distance. Backup was coming. "They won't find us," Vernon said. "This place doesn't exist on any map. It's a pocket, a fold, in the city's reality. We could stand here for hours, and to them it would be seconds. Or we could be here for seconds, and they'd search for hours. Then I'll wait. Will you? Even knowing that every second you stand here, I'm getting deeper into your head? I know about the accident, Wallace, the one that wasn't your fault, but you've blamed yourself for anyway. 8 years ago, the kid on the bike. You followed procedure, but he still died. My blood went cold. I'd never told anyone about that guilt, never even written it down. That's the thing about thoughts, Vernon continued. They leave traces, impressions in the psychic fabric of the city. And I can read them all. Every doubt, every fear, every secret shame. Would you like to know what your partner really thinks of you? What your sergeant writes in his private notes? Shut up. Or, how about this? Would you like to know about the others? The 12 other officers who've encountered me over the years. Some are still driving, you know. Endless loops around the city. Unable to stop because I'm in their passenger seat whispering truths they can't unhear. The sirens were getting closer, but the sound was distorting, echoing strangely between the warehouses. I'll make you a deal, Officer Reed. Let me go, and I'll leave your mind untouched. Try to arrest me, and I'll take up residence in your thoughts. Every time you make a traffic stop, you'll wonder if it's me. Every person you see in a back seat will have my face. Every whisper will be my voice. I kept my weapon trained on him, but my hands were shaking now. Not from fear, exactly, but from something worse. The feeling that reality itself was becoming unreliable. The warehouse district around us seemed to pulse with Vernon's presence. The shadows between buildings moved independently of any light source, and I could hear whispers in languages I didn't recognize coming from the dark spaces. My backup was still somewhere out there, their sirens echoing from impossible directions. You know what I find fascinating about police officers? Vernon said, taking another step closer, despite my weapon being pointed at his chest. You're trained to see patterns, to notice when things are wrong. But that training becomes a curse when you encounter something that shouldn't exist. Your mind keeps trying to make me fit into a category. Criminal, mentally ill, drug user, but I'm none of those things, and that terrifies you more than if I pulled a gun. Last warning, get on the ground, or what? You'll shoot me. He spread his arms wide. Go ahead, this body is stolen anyway. Poor Vernon Michaels. Picked me up on Route 66 3 weeks ago. Thought he was being a good Samaritan, giving a ride to someone in need. Now he's a puppet, and I'm the strings. I could hear footsteps behind me. Back up? I risked a glance and saw Blanche stumbling out from between two warehouses. Her face was pale, eyes wide with exhaustion and terror. "Don't let him talk," she screamed. "The more he talks, the more he gets in your head." Vernon laughed, that wet, tearing sound from his ruined mouth. "Too late for warnings, Blanche. I've already told him about the accident. Should I tell him about yours? About what really happened to your daughter?" Blanche collapsed to her knees, sobbing. She was sick. The medicine was so expensive. I thought I could stretch it, make it last longer by giving her half doses. "And she died," Vernon finished. "Not from the illness, but from your penny pinching. You've been driving ever since, haven't you? 3 years of aimless driving, trying to outrun the guilt. That's how I found you. Guilt that strong is like a beacon to things like me." I kept my weapon on Vernon but moved toward Blanche. "Ma'am, we're going to get you help." "There is no help," she said, looking up at me with hollow eyes. "Once he's in your head, he never leaves. Even if you get away, you'll hear him. Every doubt you have, every moment of weakness, will sound like his voice." The sirens were getting closer again, but now they sounded wrong. Too many of them, overlapping in a pattern that hurt to hear. Then I saw the lights. Not the red and blue of police cars, but a sickly yellow that made the air itself look diseased. "That's not your backup," Vernon said. "Those are the others. The ones who've been driving for so long they've forgotten they were ever human. They follow me now, a parade of the perpetually lost. Would you like to join them, Officer Reed?" 3 cars pulled into the parking lot, but calling them cars was generous. They were ruins, held together by rust and something that might have been dried blood. The drivers were still behind the wheels, but they'd been there so long they'd partially fused with the seats. Their eyes tracked me, but I couldn't tell if there was any consciousness left behind them. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "He's not here," Vernon said. "This part of the city forgot about salvation a long time ago. This is where hope goes to die, officer. Every abandoned building, every empty lot, every forgotten corner of Chicago feeds places like this, and I'm what grows in that soil." One of the car doors opened, and something that used to be a person tried to get out. It moved in stop-motion jerks, like a film with missing frames. When it spoke, dust came out instead of words. "That's Officer Patricia Hendricks," Vernon said conversationally. "She tried to arrest me in 2011, very determined. Followed me for 6 hours through parts of the city that don't appear on any map. By the time she realized she couldn't find her way back, it was too late. She's been driving ever since. Haven't you, Patricia?" The thing that might have been Hendricks made a sound like grinding gears. "Let them go," I said. "I don't have them, officer. They have themselves. Trapped by their own inability to accept what they experienced. If they could just admit that the world is stranger and more terrible than they believed, they could drive away. But they can't. Their training, their rationality, their desperate need for the world to make sense, that's what keeps them here." I heard my radio crackle. Real dispatch this time, I could tell by the static pattern. "Unit 23, what's your 20? GPS shows you off-grid." I reached for my radio, but Vernon was suddenly right next to me. Not moved, just there, like he'd always been standing that close. His breath smelled like formaldehyde and regret. "Tell them you're fine," he whispered. "Tell them it was a false alarm. Because if they come here, they'll join our parade. How many more officers do you want to condemn, Wallace?" I keyed the radio, my hand shaking. "Unit 23, false alarm. Suspect fled on foot, returning to patrol. Copy that, 23 RTB when you're ready." Vernon smiled that horrible smile. "Good boy. Now, let's discuss terms. I'll let Blanche go, I'll even let you go. But you have to give me something in return. What? A ride. Just one more ride. Drop me somewhere else in the city and we part ways. No harm, no foul. So you can do this to someone else? I'm going to do it anyway. The only question is whether you and Blanche join my collection or walk away with an interesting story nobody will believe. Blanche was on her feet now, backing toward my patrol car. Don't do it, she said. Don't let him in your car. Once he's in, he never really leaves. Every passenger you transport will remind you of him. But she'll be free, Vernon said. After 3 days of driving, doesn't she deserve freedom? Or would you rather see her end up like them? He gestured at the fused drivers. My mind was racing, trying to find a third option. 22 years of training had taught me how to handle violent suspects, how to de-escalate domestic disputes, how to pursue vehicles through crowded streets. But nothing had prepared me for this, for something that existed in the spaces between reality, feeding on guilt and fear. "Tick-tock, Officer Reed," Vernon said, tapping his wrist where a watch should have been. Instead, there was just exposed bone, yellowed and cracked. Dawn is coming in 3 hours. When the sun rises, this pocket of unreality will dissolve, and everyone here will be scattered across the city. Some will end up in walls, some in the lake, some spread across multiple locations. It won't be pleasant. I looked at the fused drivers, at Blanche's desperate face, at the thing wearing Vernon's body. Every instinct told me not to let him in my vehicle. But every instinct also told me these people needed help. "If I give you a ride," I said slowly, "everyone goes free? Including them?" I nodded toward the other cars. Vernon's smile faltered for just a moment. "They're too far gone. They've been driving so long they've forgotten they were ever anything else, but I could ease their passing, let them finally stop. And Blanche? Free as a bird, though the memories will remain, they always do." I made my decision. "Get in the back of my patrol car." "Wallace, no!" Blanche grabbed my arm. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand that you've been driving for 3 days, and you need this to end," I said, gently removing her grip. "Get in your car. Drive home. Don't stop for anyone." She looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and pity. "He'll never leave you alone now. Every time you close your eyes, you'll see him. Every shadow will have his shape. I'll manage." Vernon was already at my patrol car, running his fingers along the hood like he was petting an animal. Such a nice vehicle. So many memories already embedded in it. Arrests, pursuits. That time you cried after finding the dead child in the dumpster on Halstead. I gritted my teeth and opened the back door. The cage between front and back seats was reinforced steel mesh, designed to keep violent suspects contained. I hoped it would work on whatever Vernon was. He folded himself into the back seat with those impossible movements, joints bending in ways that made my stomach turn. "Comfy," he said, his voice now coming from the radio, the air vents, and his mouth simultaneously. "Where to, officer?" "Somewhere public. Somewhere with lots of people." "Ooh, looking to pass me off to another victim?" "How unethical of you." "Somewhere you can't hurt anyone." "That place doesn't exist. I hurt just by being observed. I'm the question you shouldn't ask, the thought you can't unthink. But I'll play along. Take me to Navy Pier, lots of tourists there, lots of guilty consciences to feed on." I started the car, and immediately the engine sounded wrong. Not mechanical trouble, but like something was breathing through the exhaust system. The GPS flickered on, showing our location as simultaneously everywhere and nowhere in Chicago. As I drove out of the warehouse district, I watched Blanche's Honda disappear in the opposite direction. The other cars, the ones with the fused drivers, simply faded away like bad memories. One moment they were there, the next there was just empty pavement. "They're at peace now," Vernon said, "or at least as close to peace as they'll ever get. Some prisons you can't escape from, only transform into something else." The drive was surreal. Streets I'd patrolled for years looked different with Vernon in the back. Familiar buildings had extra floors that shouldn't exist. Streetlights cast shadows that fell upward. Other cars on the road seemed to actively avoid us, swerving away without their drivers appearing to notice. "You're wondering if you're going crazy," Vernon said, his reflection in the rearview mirror showing too many eyes. "The answer is both yes and no. Yes, your perception of reality is breaking down. No, that doesn't mean what you're seeing isn't real. Reality is more flexible than you've been taught, officer. Especially in cities this old, this full of history and pain." "What are you really?" I asked, trying to keep him talking, trying to understand. "I told you. I'm what happens when a city becomes conscious. Not the good parts, the pride, the community, the hope. I'm the other thing. The accumulation of every terrible moment, every act of violence, every broken dream. Chicago has been collecting those for almost 2 centuries. I'm what grew from that soil." "You're saying you're part of Chicago?" "I'm saying I am Chicago. Or at least one face of it. The face you glimpse in your peripheral vision when you're alone on patrol at 3 a.m. The Chicago that exists in the spaces between what's real and what's feared." We were on Lakeshore Drive now. The lake to our right looking like oil under the streetlights. Navy Pier was ahead, its Ferris wheel dark at this hour. "You know what's funny?" Vernon continued. "You cops, you think you protect the city. But really, you're just managing the symptoms. The disease runs deeper than crime statistics and arrest records. It's in the bones of the place, the foundation. Every corrupt alderman, every gang shooting, every person who freezes to death because they couldn't afford heat, it all feeds things like me. So, your punishment? Revenge? I'm consequence. I'm what happens when you build a city on blood and pretend it's founded on ideals. The Great Fire didn't cleanse anything. It just drove the darkness deeper." We pulled into the empty parking lot at Navy Pier. At this hour, it was deserted except for security guards in their booth. "End of the line," I said. "Is it, though?" Vernon was already out of the car, standing beside my window despite the doors still being locked. "You've given me a ride, Officer Reed, but rides have prices. And the price for riding with me is truth. I kept my end of the deal." "You did? So here's your truth. Every traffic stop you make from now on will carry my shadow. You'll see me in every nervous driver, every passenger who won't make eye contact. The job you thought was routine will become a nightmare of possibility. Is this person real? Is that movement normal? Is that shadow supposed to bend that way? I'll manage. Will you? Let me show you something." He touched the side of my patrol car, and suddenly I could see them. Dozens of figures standing in the parking lot, all in various uniforms from different eras. Police, paramedics, firefighters. All the first responders who'd encountered things like Vernon over the years. "We all manage," one of them said, a cop in a 1970s uniform. "We manage by not sleeping, by drinking, by eating our guns when it gets too bad. Chicago doesn't just eat its young," Vernon said. "It eats its protectors too, bit by bit, call by call, until there's nothing left but the uniform and the badge." The figures faded, but I knew they were still there, just outside perception. "This is my stop," Vernon said, walking toward the pier. "But remember, Officer Reed, you've been marked now." You've seen behind the curtain, and once you've seen, you can never truly unsee. He walked into the shadows between two buildings and was gone. Not disappeared, gone, like he'd never existed at all. But I could still feel him, like a weight in my chest, a whisper in my skull. I sat in my patrol car for an hour, trying to process what had happened. Finally, I radioed in. Unit 23, returning to station. Copy that, 23. Everything okay? You've been off-grid for a while. I looked at my dash clock. It showed 3:47 a.m., but my watch showed 5:15 a.m. The GPS showed I'd driven 300 miles, but my odometer had only added 20. Yeah, I lied. Everything's fine. The drive back to the station was the longest of my life. Every shadow seemed to move independently. Every reflection in my mirrors showed things that shouldn't be there. The city itself felt different, like I was seeing it for the first time. Or maybe seeing what had always been there, hidden just beyond normal perception. I parked in the station lot and sat there for a moment trying to compose myself. My hands were still shaking, and I could taste copper in my mouth. The flavor of fear, or maybe something worse. When I finally went inside, the fluorescent lights felt too bright, too harsh, like they were trying to burn away whatever darkness had attached itself to me. "Reed, you look like hell," Sergeant Marvin Cooper said when I walked into the briefing room. He was a 25-year veteran, solid as a rock, the kind of cop who'd seen everything and remained unshaken. But when he looked at me, I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, fear. It was gone too quickly to be sure. "Rough night, Sarge. Had a runner out by the warehouses. Your GPS went screwy. Had you off-grid for over an hour." "Yeah, something wrong with the satellites, maybe. Kept putting me in Lake Michigan." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Write it up. Make sure you mention the technical difficulties. Don't want anyone thinking you were sleeping on the job." I went to my desk and started typing the report. How do you document something like Vernon? In the end, I wrote what they'd expect. Pursued speeding vehicle. Driver fled on foot, unable to apprehend. Technical difficulties with GPS and radio. Nothing that would raise eyebrows. But as I typed, I noticed something. Other officers were giving me a wide berth. Conversations stopped when I walked by. It was subtle, but after 18 years on the force, you learn to read a room. They knew something was different about me. Wallace. I looked up to see Officer Marvin Jackson, my usual partner when we doubled up. He was standing a good 5 feet away, farther than normal. "Yeah? You okay? You've got this look." "What kind of look?" "Like you've seen something bad." I forced a laugh. "Just tired, Marv. You know how these night shifts get." But he didn't smile back. My grandmother used to talk about cops who'd seen behind the veil, she called it. Said the city showed them its true face sometimes, usually on night shifts, usually when they were alone. Said those cops were never the same after. Your grandmother sounds like she had some stories. She did. Used to be a dispatcher back in the 60s. Said she'd hear things on the radio sometimes, voices that shouldn't exist, calling in reports from places that weren't on any map. He paused, looked around to make sure no one was listening. She said, if it ever happened to me, I should transfer. Get out of Chicago. Go somewhere the city couldn't reach. That's ridiculous. Is it? He leaned closer, and I could smell his aftershave, sharp and medicinal. Because right now, Wallace, you've got the same look my uncle had before he ate his gun. Same look as Detective Morrison before he disappeared. Same look as every cop who's ever driven into the wrong part of the city and come back changed. Detective Morrison. Why did that name sound familiar? I don't know what you're talking about. No? Then why is your shadow pointing the wrong way? I looked down. He was right. Despite the overhead fluorescence, my shadow was stretching toward the window, as if being pulled by some external light source. When I looked back up, Marvin was already walking away. "Be careful, Wallace," he called over his shoulder. "Once you've seen it, it sees you too." The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I avoided taking any more traffic stops, claiming my patrol car needed maintenance. But even sitting at my desk, I could feel Vernon's presence. Not him specifically, but what he represented. The knowledge that Chicago, my city, the place I'd sworn to protect, was something else entirely. Something hungry and ancient and aware. When 7 a.m. finally came, I practically ran to my car. But as I was pulling out of the lot, my phone rang, unknown number. "Officer Reed?" It was Blanche's voice, but different. Calmer, clearer. "Miss?" "Morrison, are you okay?" "I'm home. First time in 3 days. My husband thought I was dead." She paused. "I wanted to thank you." "You don't need to, but I also wanted to warn you. Vernon isn't gone. Things like him don't really leave. They just redistribute. Every person who's encountered him carries a piece, and now you do too." "What does that mean?" "It means you'll see things. The real things that hide behind what everyone else sees. The homeless aren't just homeless. Some of them are refugees from parts of the city that shouldn't exist. The abandoned buildings aren't just abandoned. Some of them are quarantined, keeping things inside that must never get out. And the other cops, some of them know. Some of them have seen. They'll recognize you now as one of them." "One of what?" "The awakened. The ones who know Chicago isn't just a city, but a living thing with its own agenda. My advice, find the others. The ones with shadows that point wrong. The ones who avoid certain streets without being able to explain why. They can help you adjust." "Adjust to what?" "To your new reality, Officer Reed. The one where every traffic stop might open a door to somewhere else, where every pursuit might lead you off the map, where every shadow might have teeth." She hung up. I drove home on autopilot, my mind churning. When I got to my apartment building, I noticed things I'd never seen before. Symbols carved into the doorframe, so faint they were almost invisible. Salt lines across thresholds. A small mirror positioned to reflect anyone entering. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was in the hallway. She'd lived in the building for 40 years, a sweet old woman who always had cookies for the cops in the building. But when she saw me, her face went pale. "Officer Reed," she said carefully, "you look different." "Long night, Mrs. Chen." She studied me for a moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small charm on a red string. "Wear this," she said, pressing it into my hand. "It won't protect you completely, but it might help." "Help with what?" "With what you've seen." "With what's seen you." She patted my hand. "My father was a cop too, back in China. He used to say that every city has two faces, one for the living and one for everything else. Seems you've glimpsed the second one." I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded and took the charm. Inside my apartment, everything looked normal but felt wrong. The angles of the walls seemed off by a degree or two. The shadows fell in directions that didn't match the light sources. And in the corner of my living room, just at the edge of perception, I could swear I saw Vernon sitting in my recliner, smiling that torn smile. When I blinked, he was gone. But the indentation in the chair remained. I didn't sleep that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that warehouse district, watching those fused drivers trying to escape their vehicles. Every sound in the building became Vernon's voice, telling me truths I didn't want to know. That night, I was scheduled off, but I couldn't stay in the apartment. I drove instead, aimlessly at first, then with growing purpose. I found myself returning to the warehouse district, to the spot where everything had happened. It looked different in daylight. Normal. Just abandoned buildings and empty lots. No sign of the horror I'd witnessed. But as the sun set and shadows lengthened, I began to see the cracks. Places where reality was thin, where the other Chicago showed through. You came back. I spun around. Vernon was there, but not really, more like an after-image, a possibility of presence. I told you, Officer Reed. Once you've been marked, you can never really leave. This is your beat now, the borderlands between what is and what shouldn't be. I didn't ask for this. Nobody asks for the truth. But once you have it, you have responsibilities. There are others like me out there, things that feed on the city's pain, its forgotten spaces, its lost souls. And now you can see them. The question is, what will you do about it? What can I do? I'm just one cop. You're a cop who knows the truth. That makes you dangerous, to them and to yourself. He started to fade, becoming translucent. The city needs guardians, Wallace. Not just against crime, but against what crime attracts, what despair births, what abandonment nurtures. I don't understand. You will. When you see the thing living in the abandoned school on Cottage Grove. When you encounter the woman who collects faces at Union Station. When you realize that some of the missing persons cases aren't crimes, but harvests. You'll understand that Chicago has always had two police forces, the official one and the one that operates in shadows, keeping the real darkness at bay. He was almost gone now, just a whisper of presence. Find Detective Yang in the 18th District. Tell her Vernon sent you. She'll introduce you to the others, the real protectors of Chicago. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the growing darkness of the warehouse district. But not really alone. I could feel them now, the other things that lived in the margins. Watching, waiting, testing to see what I would do with my new sight. I got back in my car and drove to the 18th District. It was time to find out what being a Chicago cop really meant. Detective Yang was waiting for me in the parking lot, as if she'd known I was coming. She was maybe 40, Asian, with eyes that had seen too much. When she looked at me, I saw the same wrongness I now carried reflected back. "Vernon?" she asked. I nodded. He's kind of like an initiation. Those who survive him with their sanity intact get invited to the real job. She handed me a business card. It was blank, except for an address. "Tomorrow night, 2 a.m., we'll introduce you to the Night Watch." The Night Watch? The cops who police the things that shouldn't exist. Welcome to the real Chicago, Officer Reed. Hope you survive it. As I drove home, I realized my life had fundamentally changed. I was still a cop, but now I served two cities, the one everyone saw and the one that lurked beneath, the one Vernon had shown me, the one that had always been there, waiting for someone to see it truly, and once seen, it could never be unseen. The address Detective Yang had given me led to an abandoned fire station in Bridgeport, one of those old brick buildings the city kept meaning to demolish but never got around to. At 2 a.m., the street was empty except for a few parked cars that looked like they'd been there for years, covered in dust and bird droppings. I pushed open the door, which should have been locked but wasn't, and stepped into darkness. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. That shift in reality I was beginning to recognize. The air became thicker, charged with something that made my skin prickle. "Officer Reed." Yang's voice came from above. "Up here." I climbed the old brass pole to the second floor, my hands finding grooves worn by decades of firefighters. The upper floor had been converted into something between a command center and a library. Maps of Chicago covered every wall, but not normal maps. These showed things like probability of reality slippage, and known entity territories, and do not patrol alone zones. There were 12 people in the room, all cops or former cops based on their bearing. Some were in uniform, others in plain clothes. All had that same look, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen behind the curtain and couldn't forget what was there. "Welcome to the Night Watch," Yang said. "The unofficial, unacknowledged, unfunded group of officers who handle what the regular force can't even acknowledge exists." An older black woman in a sergeant's uniform stepped forward. "Sergeant Beverly Washington, 15th District. I've been doing this for 20 years, ever since I pursued a suspect into a building that hadn't existed the day before." Others introduced themselves. Officer Tommy O'Brien from the 9th, who'd encountered something living in the sewers under Chinatown. Detective Luis Ramirez from the 22nd, who'd investigated a series of disappearances that led to doors that opened onto other versions of Chicago. Each had their own story of awakening, their own moment when the city revealed its true nature. "Vernon's just one of many," Yang explained. "The city is full of these things. Some are like him, conscious, capable of communication. Others are more like forces of nature, mindless but dangerous. And then there are the things that actively hunt." She pulled down a map section showing the loop. Red X's marked dozens of locations. These are active sites, places where reality is thin, where things cross over. The old Sears Tower has something living in the upper floors that feeds on ambition. There's a thing in the tunnels under City Hall that eats secrets. And Lower Wacker Drive, well, Lower Wacker has always been wrong, even before we knew why. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Forever," Sergeant Washington said. "Chicago's always been special. Maybe it's the lake, maybe it's the location, maybe it's the history. But things are drawn here. The Great Fire wasn't just a disaster. It was a feeding frenzy for entities that consume suffering. And ever since, they've been part of the city's ecosystem. The regular department knows," O'Brien added. "At the highest levels, anyway. Why do you think certain cases get buried? Why some crime scenes get cleaned too quickly? Why some officers who see too much get involuntary psych evaluations? They're covering it up? They're managing it," Yang corrected. "Imagine if the public knew. Panic, exodus, economic collapse. So we handle things quietly. A missing person here, an unexplained death there. We keep the balance." She showed me a thick binder filled with reports, photos, and testimonies. Cases going back decades. Officers who'd encountered things that shouldn't exist. Most were marked resolved, but I knew that didn't mean solved. It meant contained, covered up, forgotten. "So, what do we actually do?" I asked. "We patrol the borders," Washington said. "Keep the things that live in the margins from spreading into normal Chicago. Sometimes that means investigation. Sometimes intervention, sometimes just witness, because some things can't be stopped, only documented. And Vernon? Vernon's unique," Yang said. "He's not malevolent exactly. He's more like a symptom. When the city's psychic pressure gets too high, too much crime, too much suffering, too much despair, things like Vernon manifest. They're release valves in a way. Release valves that drive people insane." "Better a few individuals than the whole city," O'Brien said grimly. "You haven't seen what happens when the pressure builds too high. Summer of '95, the heat wave, that wasn't just weather. Something was feeding on the deaths, growing stronger. if we hadn't found and destroyed its nest. He trailed off, shuddering at the memory. Yang handed me a modified radio, bulkier than the standard issue. This operates on frequencies normal radios can't access. If you encounter something, call it in. Someone will respond. We don't leave our people alone out there. What about backup? Reports? The chain of command? For normal crime, proceed as usual. But for this, Washington gestured at the maps. We're on our own. No reports, no paperwork, no official existence. We're the thin blue line between Chicago and chaos, and nobody can know we exist. I spent the next 3 hours learning about the hidden Chicago. The landmarks I'd driven past 1,000 times that were actually containment sites. The abandoned buildings that were abandoned for good reasons. The patterns in crime statistics that revealed something feeding, moving, hunting. They showed me photos that wouldn't make sense to normal eyes. Crime scenes where the shadows fell wrong. Missing persons cases where the person was still visible in reflections. Bodies that had been killed by geometry. Angles that shouldn't exist, forcing their way into three-dimensional space. The hardest part, Ramirez said, is the isolation. You can't tell your family, can't explain to your regular partner why you avoid certain calls, can't justify why you need a day off after encountering something that tears at your sanity. Some of us crack, Washington added quietly. The suicide rate for Night Watch members is 3 times the department average. Others just disappear. Walk into the wrong place and never come back, or come back wrong. Then why do it? Because someone has to, Yang said simply. Because every night things try to cross over. And every night we push them back. We're not heroes, we're janitors, cleaning up messes that shouldn't exist. As dawn approached, the meeting broke up. Officers headed back to their regular shifts, their normal lives, carrying the weight of what they knew. Yang walked me to my car. You'll get a call when you're needed, she said. Could be tonight, could be next month. When it comes, respond fast. These things don't wait for backup. Any advice? Trust your instincts. If a place feels wrong, it probably is. If a person seems off, they might not be a person. And never, ever pursue alone into unmarked territory. We've lost too many that way. She handed me a small notebook. Start documenting. Everything you see, everything you feel. It helps to write it down, makes it feel more real, or less real, depends on what you need. I drove home as the sun rose, painting Chicago in gold and pink. The city looked normal, beautiful even. Commuters heading to work, joggers in the parks, life continuing as it always had. None of them knowing what lurked just outside their perception. Over the next week, I tried to return to normal patrol duties. But everything was different now. I could see the cracks, the places where reality wore thin. I noticed which homeless people weren't quite human, which abandoned buildings hummed with the wrong frequency, which shadows moved independently of their sources. My first night watch call came 10 days later. 3:47 a.m., the modified radio crackling to life. Entity active at Graceland Cemetery. Responding units needed. I was 6 blocks away. I responded, arriving to find Yang and O'Brien already there. Inside the cemetery, something was wrong with the monuments. They were moving, slowly, rearranging themselves into a pattern. It's trying to build a door, Yang said. Something from outside wants in. We spent the next 4 hours disrupting the pattern, moving monuments back, breaking the geometry it was trying to create. By dawn, whatever was trying to enter had given up. For now. That became my new reality. Days doing normal police work. Nights responding to things that shouldn't exist. Traffic stops where the driver had too many shadows. Domestic calls where the house itself was the abuser. missing persons who were still there, just sideways to normal space. I learned the city's secret geography, the safe routes through dangerous territory, the words that could close doors that should never have opened, the signs that someone had been taken by something that wore their skin better than they ever had, and always, in the back of my mind, Vernon's presence. Not him specifically, but the knowledge he'd given me. The understanding that Chicago wasn't just a city, but a living thing, ancient and hungry and aware. Every night we held the line against things that wanted in. Every night we kept the city human. 6 months after my encounter with Vernon, I was training a rookie. Fresh out of the academy, all enthusiasm and certainty. We were doing a routine traffic stop on Division Street when I saw it, the driver's shadow pointing the wrong way. "Stay in the car," I told the rookie, "but procedure says, stay in the car." I approached the vehicle carefully, hand on my weapon. The driver turned to look at me, and I saw Vernon's smile on a stranger's face. "Officer Reed," the thing that wasn't Vernon but was Vernon adjacent said. "How nice to see you again." "I've been watching you. You're doing well, keeping the balance, protecting the flock." "License and registration," it laughed, that familiar tearing sound. "Still trying to make the abnormal normal. That's what I like about you night watch types. You never give up the pretense that rules apply." "They do apply, just different rules." "Exactly." It handed me a driver's license that showed a face that didn't match the one I was looking at. "Tell me, officer, do you regret it?" Seeing the truth. I thought about the question, about the sleepless nights, the constant vigilance, the isolation from everyone who lived in the normal world, but also about the people I'd saved from things they'd never know existed, the boundaries I'd helped maintain, the city I was really protecting. "No," I said. "Someone has to see. Someone has to know." "Good answer." The thing smiled wider. "The city needs its guardians. Both kinds. The ones who protect against crime, and the ones who protect against consequence. Keep up the good work, officer. There are worse things than me out there. Much worse. And they're always testing the borders." It drove away, and I knew I'd never catch it. Some things weren't meant to be caught, just contained, managed, observed. I got back in the patrol car. The rookie was pale, sweating. "What was that?" he asked. "Just a warning," I said. "Sometimes people aren't what they seem." He nodded, but I could see the questions in his eyes, the doubt. Maybe someday he'd see behind the veil, too. Maybe he'd join the night watch. Or maybe he'd stay in the normal world, blissfully unaware of what moved in the shadows. Either way, I'd be out there, every night, watching the borders, keeping the balance, protecting Chicago from itself. Because that's what we do. We serve and protect. Even from things that shouldn't exist. Even from truths that shouldn't be known. My name is Officer Wallace Reed. I'm a Chicago cop, and I guard the frequencies between what is and what shouldn't be. The city depends on it, even if it never knows.